watching Force 13's live streaming service. This is Force 13 live coverage on Hurricane Dorian. It's weakened a little bit, still has winds of 145 miles per hour, a pressure of 940 millibars at the last National Hurricane Center update, which has just come out. I can tell you also that some warnings have been extended. The storm surge warning, the hurricane warning, and the storm surge and hurricane watches have all had extensions. Amongst the vibrations, my name is Nathan Foy. I'm joined by the team and I'll introduce them shortly. A summary of those warnings: a storm surge warning in effect for Lantana to Altamaha Sound, a storm surge watch for north of Deerfield Beach to south of Lantana and Altamaha Sound to South Sante River, a hurricane warning for Grand Bahama and the Abacos Islands in the northwestern Bahamas and Jupiter Inlet to Ponte Vedra Beach, a hurricane watch for north of Deerfield Beach to Jupiter Inlet and north of Ponte Vedra Beach to South Sante River, a tropical storm warning for north of Deerfield Beach to Jupiter Inlet, and a tropical storm watch for north of Golden Beach to Deerfield Beach and Lake Okeechobee. The storm is still lingering off the northern side of Grand Bahama. It has probably completely devastated that part of the island, at least. It has stalled. It is moving extremely slowly. The National Hurricane Center actually lists it as stationary at their latest advisory. I'm joined by David, Strat, Isaac and Thomas for this hour of coverage just after 5 p.m. Eastern Time. The storm not moving very much at all, gradually weakening very slowly. What happens next?
I mean, the number thing we need to look for is just seeing when this thing starts to pick up any forward momentum again. You know, the NHC says it's stationary right now, and when it does, which direction it starts moving in and how quickly that speed picks up. You know, we've already seen the devastation that's undoubtedly occurred on Abaco, some of the videos we saw yesterday, and, you know, what's undoubtedly happening on Grand Bahama right now and has been happening there for 24 hours. But, you know, any forward directional movement and which way it's going and when that occurs is going to adversely impact how this could reach the United States in any shape or form. If you look at the NHC's extensive tropical storm force winds, right now they show it just barely off the coast of the eastern Florida right now.
We'll show that shortly as soon as we get an updated map.
Yeah. The newest graphic shows tropical storm force winds barely starting to clip the eastern coast of Florida at this point in time. So a very slow movement in the next 48 hours or so could contribute to more significant effects occurring there just from prolonged impacts.
There's the latest map. Hurricane Watch extending midway through South Carolina now. Very interesting forecast. They expect it to remain a Category 3 until Wednesday night, when it's passing close to Georgia and South Carolina. It is becoming rather unlikely now that there is going to be a Florida landfall. I would say the percentage chances of that have now fallen to about 20%. But with an expanding wind field, tropical storm force winds are already beginning to occur in eastern Florida. And hurricane force winds cannot be ruled out at all for the coastline there, from anywhere from Jupiter all the way to the Outer Banks of North Carolina. But something that just caught my eye just now, we've been watching this storm apparently weaken for some time. The eye wall has been looking increasingly shoddy. The eye shape has been looking pretty terrible, rather appalling in recent hours. But the storm is not giving up right now, because the latest estimate, the eye temperature is a good one of the metrics that we use to ascertain whether the storm is strengthening or weakening. A lower eye temperature usually means a weakening storm. Well, we had the eye temperature drop from 18 degrees this morning down to 9 degrees this afternoon, but now it has gone back up to 15.
It's back up to 15. I thought just very briefly ago it was at like 9 or 8.
Not so long ago it was.
So definitely,
It's fluctuating, I suppose you could say. But
yeah, I was going to say very significant fluctuation.
And interestingly, the eye wall is building back in as well on the northern and northwestern side. Will this storm give up? It is moving extremely slowly, barely moving at all. That means that the possibility for upwelling is quite substantial, and that will decrease the storm's intensity if it stays perched in that location for too long. At the moment, doesn't look like it's happening. Well, obviously it has a little bit already because it was a Category 5 and now it no longer is. Still a mid-range Category 4, but it looks to be stabilizing at the very least.
Well, Recon just went in for another pass in there, and they found a minimum pressure down to excuse me. They found a minimum pressure down to 940.5 millibars. Winds are kind of up in the air because it's seeing a lot of suspect readings on my end, so I don't know necessarily on the winds, but pressure still full up to 940.5 millibars, and there's another plane also that's going to come in and take another pass over Dorian really soon, probably in about 10 minutes or so.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
there's a new plane that just took off from the Central Florida Peninsula that's imminently doing a west to east pass for the eye wall rather than a diagonal pass. So we should get some more information out of that very briefly. I'm sure we'll be able to bring that to you guys as soon as that information comes out, probably within the next 5 to 10 minutes.
Let's just bring us back to that National Hurricane Center forecast graphic. So major hurricane conditions are still possible along the Florida coast. Southern Florida, central Florida really, looking at Tuesday into Wednesday as it reaches northern Florida during the hours of Wednesday, and then the possibility for Georgia Wednesday night, South Carolina Thursday morning into the afternoon, North Carolina Thursday night into Friday, and then the storm moves off towards the northeast further. In the cone right now is places like the southern tip of the Delmarva Peninsula, Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and Nova Scotia, possibly as a post-tropical cyclone, which is what is the National Hurricane Center are currently predicting. Looking at the wind speed probabilities, these have increased for those areas towards the northeast once again. So Cape Cod, for instance, you're looking at 43% on that graphic, and coastal New Jersey up towards 20% at this time, and of course Nova Scotia getting up beyond 50% at the moment on the southern tip.
Yeah, and as the storm continues to progress, these odds will potentially increase as well.
Key messages on the screen: devastating winds and storm surge will continue to affect Grand Bahama Island through tonight. Everyone there should remain in shelter and not venture into the eye. Life-threatening storm surge and dangerous hurricane-force winds are expected along portions of the Florida East Coast and the coasts of Georgia and South Carolina, regardless of the exact track of Dorian's center. Water levels could begin to rise well in advance of the arrival of strong winds. Residents in these areas should follow advice given by local emergency officials. The risk of life-threatening storm surge and hurricane-force winds continues to increase along the coast of North Carolina. Residents in these areas should follow advice given by local emergency officials, and heavy rains capable of producing life-threatening flash floods are expected over the northern portions of the Bahamas and coastal sections of the southeast and lower mid-Atlantic regions of the United States through Friday. That's a long time from now, and a lot of areas will get possibility for flooding. Screen sharing right now is one of our team members. Who's doing that? Is that David? Radar.
National Weather Service radar, Miami. I think it's Miami. The one I saw showed yesterday.
Yeah, that's the imagery
And
that we've been looking at.
looking
Very
at it,
so.
Nathan, yeah, looking at it, it really hasn't moved.
Sure doesn't look like it.
But the rain bands are definitely increasing when you look at them over the Florida region.
Yeah, I mean, the past 36 hours and potentially another 12 to 24 hours as well, if the storm doesn't start to move immediately, is just an absolutely catastrophic circumstance for Grand Bahama, and is continuing to be so for Abaco Island, where I'm pretty certain emergency resources are doubtful to still be able to reach the area, considering the heavy convection tropical storm force winds on all of the island, hurricane force winds on some of it still. That will be preventing any help from getting there for still quite some time. So just an absolutely disastrous situation that's unfolded. And you could say something very similar for Grand Bahama right now in Freeport. The stall that we saw last night saved Freeport getting a direct eye pass, but the eye wall is definitely still impacting them, and that's also just something that's absolutely devastating.
Nathan, I'd like to bring to the viewers that when we went off air last night during the automated stream session, I cited a report where one of the airports down there in the Bahamas, 5 feet or under 5 feet of water, and that most likely increase. So one of the airports was 5 feet under.
Yeah, and the eye temperature is fluctuating a lot right now. In just a few minutes, it's gone from 15 back down to 14, I think it was, or 13. So it is jumping around loads at the minute. What is interesting, though, is that the storm, the center of the eye, is still remaining rather to the north of the National Hurricane Center's forecast. I think I've got the 5 p.m. update track, and it looks to me as though they've gone almost purposely further south with the track forecast for some reason to initialize, because they've started the storm, as far as I can tell. They've initiated the center of the storm to be a whole 10 miles south of where it actually is on their forecast, so I'm not sure whether that might change things.
If that's the case, if that is the case, would that means that it would track further west?
It's a precious 10 miles. If it's 10 miles further east than the forecast, then that puts naturally a 10-mile radius of land between getting tropical storm force winds and not, and between getting hurricane force winds and not. But latest information is that the storm has 145 mile an hour winds, a pressure of 940 millibars, an extremely intense storm still, although it has weakened quite significantly today. Here's something else that we can show you. Is that up to date? I'm not sure that's up to date at the moment, so we'll leave that for now. Let's instead show you the latest look around the Atlantic. So Hurricane Dorian is there quite clearly, but there are some other areas of interest that could develop in the Atlantic this week. The first disturbance, number 1 on that depiction there, has a 90% chance of developing in the next 5 days, 80% displayed there in the next 48 hours. That one is going to track towards the northwest. Number 2 there now has a 60% chance of development in the next 2 days and a 70% chance in 5. That's moving towards the west, towards the coast, the border with Mexico and Texas. And number 3 there has a 30% chance in 48 hours and a 40% chance in 5 days. And that one's going to move towards the north or northeast. But if that does develop into a tropical storm, that one could go on to affect Bermuda. In the eastern Pacific, Juliet has become a hurricane. That is another hurricane that's active on the other side of the US continent, of the North American continent. And in the western Pacific, we have two systems here, Tropical Storm 15W named Ling Ling and Tropical Storm 14W, and they have 91W indicated there, but that has been named by the Japanese meteorological agency Kajiki. So there are now 4 named storms active around the world at this time, an increasingly busy situation around the world. So as Dorian continues to weaken, we will slowly start to introduce more coverage on those other storms as well. But Dorian still remains well and truly our main feature as we continue to watch it stall at this time. In general, the eye does appear to be weakening. It is very ragged now on the satellite imagery. I'm still can't make my mind up about whether the cloud tops around the storm are waning or not. Interesting to note, near the center of the storm, near the eye itself, on the western side there appears to be quite a significant weakness opening up there, and on the northeastern side as well. So that might be another sign of things to come, but at the moment it's still remaining a rather strong category 4, and will still be delivering huge misery to those islands. Potentially still a 23-foot storm surge for some of those areas.
I mean, absolutely, that's a certainty. And you got to keep in mind the area which is being impacted the worst right now of Grand Bahama. The maximum elevation on the whole island is 40 feet. So almost complete inundation on the island is possible, especially because the storm surge has been lapping around there for a very long time at this point, just circling around as the storm continues to churn up water. And, absolutely no rest for those that are in harm's way there right now as the storm decided to just park itself directly offshore. The worst of the system, the southeastern eye wall, still impacting portions of eastern Grand Bahama as well, and has been doing so for some time. Catastrophic impacts that have happened yesterday from 175 to 180 mile an hour sustained winds coming onshore initially to now what we're seeing now. Just still an absolutely devastating system.
Now you can see a tiny island on the right-hand side of the storm's eye. That's the closest point of land from the center of the storm's eye. That is roughly 8 miles. That's Great Sail Key on the right-hand side. That's inside the eye by the looks of things. Grand Bahama itself looks like it's either exiting or just has exited the storm's eye. It has been moving, well, which way is it moving? It's very difficult to tell, really. But I can do a little extrapolation over the last few hours and see how far it's moved. Let me just see if I can get that for you. So since 3:40 p.m. UTC, which is how long ago is that? That's nearly 6 hours ago. So in the course of 5 hours, it has moved north by 10 miles. So in 5 hours, it's moved 10 miles north. So that would be an average speed of 2 miles per hour towards the north. Well, that is the best possible news, is that the storm is not moving west at all in the last few hours. It is showing signs of weakening, certainly not quickly enough, but there are further signs over time. We've had a chat with a few people off air suggesting that the eye wall could be finished very soon, and the upwelling will cause major problems for the storm in the next 24 hours. Whether that happens, it's up to us to find out, and unfortunately there's no easy way of telling you whether that will actually verify or not. All we can tell you right now is what we're looking at. Science would suggest that the upwelling from the center of the storm's eye, it's sucking up so much energy from those warm waters, and the energy is eventually going to run out if the storm doesn't start moving again. That is the philosophy for the storm weakening. It's already begun. Whether it continues more, that's something that we'll have to figure out.
Yeah, and just one of the problems that we're seeing right now with the future track forecast with this is that because it's not moving at all, and we're kind of uncertain at this point when it's going to pick up speed. It makes it more difficult to say where could this potentially go, how far west is going to go, how far east is going to go, how quickly will it move north, especially because with the eye kind of larger, more ragged, especially right now when it's really not moving much, we're a bit more prone to seeing some eye wobbles happen as well. And when it's stationary, we see a couple mile move and might start to assume that's a directional movement, and then it just stalls out again. As the storm kind of just rights itself up.
Sorry about those notification noises, by the way. I thought all my dials had been turned down, but magically some more dials appeared that hadn't been turned down just randomly. I don't know. That won't happen again. Anyway, the latest imagery there on our screen. Let's see if we can go to the visible now. Not too much time. Well, there's still a little bit of light left, but eventually, in a couple of hours, the light will start to fade over the storm. Still looking rather ferocious on the satellite imagery. To be honest, on visible, it's not showing that many signs of weakening, and that's why visible imagery can often be deceiving. What you can notice, though, late on in that loop is on the western side, and actually earlier on as well, looks like there is a depression in the clouds there on the western side, and that is where we've been talking about this dry slot, and indeed the potential collapse of the western eye wall, which was depicted by radar earlier. And I'm sure we'll get a look at radar again shortly. Isaac, do you have that right now? There is some radar imagery at this time. What are we seeing?
You're seeing the storm slowly progress on westward, and then take on, looks like a slightly northwestern motion with time there, and then the last two kind of just wobbles around there, not really moving much, if any. Going just really north of Grand Bahama in the last few frames when it reaches the end here. And I could also see that dry area towards the west start to develop and get a little bit bigger too.
What I will still say, though, is that it's still pretty remarkable that we've had a storm this intense, a strong Category 4 or higher for the better part of 4 days now that hasn't had its eye cloud over once. With storms this powerful, we don't typically see a clear eye fully sustain itself for this long. Even, if we're talking about the eye wall starting to potentially crumble apart, the eye itself, despite being more ragged, has still stayed pretty clear and mostly round as well throughout the better part of today, and that's kind of been consistent with its trend for over half a week now. So seeing that, is remarkable enough on its own before you even take into account that this is the strongest storm ever recorded in modern era in the Atlantic Basin to occur outside of the Gulf of Mexico or Caribbean Sea.
And when there's times where I can't even see where the start of that loop and where the end of that loop is, because this storm just hasn't moved.
It's where you see that the western side there, when it starts to get more blue.
Yep.
See right there? That's when it ends.
There it goes.
Back up.
Could you just leave us with that last image? The latest
Sure,
image.
Oh, pause.
And there it is.
Something.
Oh, there it was. I'll let you sort that out. But
and just data I'm looking from on Recon, it looks like they're probably going to have to notch up the pressure a few more millibars, probably closer to 945 now, just to kind of adapt to the new Recon readings. Something that is interesting, though, that we're going to have to watch for a potential trend, because it's 1 minute imagery. You want to see continuous development to confirm a trend. Is that there is significantly stronger cloud tops blowing up on the southern half of the system again. Not directly on the eye wall, but right south, Bahamas, potentially start wrapping around the system. We're going to want to watch and see if that trend continues over the next several hours of our live coverage. If you want to potentially pull that up quickly as well, just to get a look at that.
I got the radar back.
I know some of us use different infrared imagery, but based on the scales that we see, you'll probably be able to notice that trends start to pop up. But instead of just jumping to conclusions and saying, the storm's getting better organized. So if we want to see, will this last another couple hours, or is this just a brief thing that will fall apart? But seeing this trend occur is interesting. to say the least.
Very latest image coming out from 22 minutes past, which is just 2 minutes ago, showing that the eye temperature appears to have fallen again and would now be down, looks like 8 degrees Celsius, which is tied for the coldest that the eye has been since the peak intensity. So the general trend for that eye temperature is downwards. So another sign of weakening. And from what you said there on the recon, did you say that they could only find 945?
No, it was 940.5.
I mean, the minimum flight level pressure that they got was around 940 some, in between 940 and 943. So you just presume with that they're going to have to up the pressure a bit closer
Just
to
a little
945 millibars.
Probably 941.
And, you know, we've just seen these oscillations with the eye temperature as well today. And fortunately, at least for the time being, it looks like we're seeing a weakening trend established with that.
To answer your stretch question, it was 940.5 was the lowest they found on the second plane. I haven't been able to check if it's updated yet. It probably has by now.
All right. Well, I think we do have more time for questions now that the storm isn't doing a huge amount in terms of change. So you can send them in. Start your message with Force 13 all in text in the chat section of our live stream right now. Do you think we should worry about the invest to the west of Cape Verde in the United States over the next couple of weeks? Most likely, the invest that is forming there will stay out to sea and not do very much at all. What the models are picking up on is a system behind that over the African continent, which is a fifth system that is likely to develop into a tropical cyclone. It wasn't on that image that we showed you earlier because it's not in the 2-day picture, but in 5 days I think they have it at 40%. And models are suggesting that could become a major hurricane out in the Atlantic next week. But at the moment they're indicating that it will probably stay out to sea. No guarantees on that at such a long range, but that's something to watch for in the second week of September.
Nathan, National Hurricane Center, one of their many Twitter accounts, TAFB, just looking at the key messages, marine key message, Dorian will produce winds in 30 to 40 foot seas today through Tuesday as Dorian tracks westward over the Grand Bahama. Seas will build to 40 to 50 feet off the east central coast of Florida by Wednesday as Dorian gradually turns northward. So that is the two key messages for the marine.
A question here. We 100% confirmed of a northern turn as of right now. Well, that is sort of luring us into making statements that people might take very seriously and say, oh hey, the storm's over. Well, it has taken a northward turn in the last 5 hours, but with the steering currents as weak as they are, or as non-existent as they are, this storm has no direction at all. It is completely rudderless. There's no telling where it will go next. It is completely stalling right now. It could shift back to the west. We are hopeful that it will continue moving towards the north and will remain east of the National Hurricane Center forecast track, as it is doing so far, by 10 miles. So fingers crossed that will continue. But at the moment, Florida definitely on their most extreme guard for hurricane conditions, which could occur if the storm moves west by a matter of, maybe 30 or 40 miles.
Nathan, I'm just looking at the discussion paper from the National Hurricane Center. Some additional decrease in wind speed is likely in the short term due to a possible eye wall replacement upwelling. Well, that's a key point of cooler water caused by the very slow motion of the hurricane. Although some additional slow weakening is forecast while the hurricane moves northward along the southeastern United States coastline due to increasing southwesterly shear. Dorian is forecast to remain a powerful hurricane during that time. The NHC intensity forecast is a blend of the latest statistical and consensus model guidance, and Dorian has become nearly stationary, lending support to what you just said this afternoon, with the two most recent aircraft fixes showing essentially no motion. A slow westward to west northwest motion should resume overnight and continue into early Tuesday, with the eye of devastating winds only slowly pulling away from the Grand Bahama Island. But so by Tuesday afternoon, Dorian should begin its much anticipated northwestward turn as the weakness becomes more pronounced in the subtropical ridge. Although the center, go on.
I'm just moving on to questions here, David. Is that
Yep.
all right? What kind of impacts would we see in low country South Carolina? Well, at the moment, there is the potential for a 7-foot storm surge all along the coastal regions. Rainfall, if the storm moves within about 100 miles of you, anywhere along the coast of the United States, you'll be looking at 12 inches of rain or higher, most likely. Chance of tropical storm force winds down there in South Carolina, very high. Along the coast, it's very high, well above 60% in general, into the 70s and 80s in some places now. Inland, obviously it makes more of a difference the further inland you are. Those chances still significant though. Let me just see if I can just have a look at some locations along there and give you a few percentages as it stands. So you've got Charleston, obviously, which is pretty much 80%. Columbia is much lower, only about 28%. Augusta is at about 25%. Florence at about 35%. So not much. That I don't know how far that is. Probably a few dozen miles, maybe a little more. But it does make a big difference the further inland you are when it comes to Georgia, South Carolina, North, even Florida actually. All of these locations, the further inland you are, the safer it will most likely be. That becomes slightly less true as you get towards the North Carolina Outer Banks, because you've got places like Greenville, which is still at 40-something%, Rocky Mount just over 30%, Virginia Beach and Norfolk, Virginia in the 30s. That's percentage chances for tropical storm force winds in the next 5 days. And of course, if the storm's track deviates west, then that will obviously increase markedly. But we're hopeful that the storm will remain east. Not saying that that is certain or even likely at this point, because the National Hurricane Center believe that the storm will move northwest after it starts moving again. But for every moment that it is stalling right now in its same place, it is losing energy. It is there's less energy below it from the sea surface to tap into, and the chances increase of rapid weakening every moment that it doesn't move. But if it starts moving west, then the chances of hurricane force conditions increase for every moment that it's moving west. If it moves north or east, then those percentage chances start to decrease. We've seen precious little eastward movement recently, but there has been just a slight bit in the last 5 hours. It's been north, just east of north at 2 miles per hour, making up 10 miles in 5 hours. But in the last hour or two, it has really slowed down to the point where the National Hurricane Center say that it's stationary, and that isn't helping anyone right now. Its current position, the center of the eye, is about 8 miles off the coast of Great Sail Key, which is north of Grand Bahama.
Yeah, and if there's any other questions that you guys want to have answered at some point, we can try to get to them. Start your message with Force 13, all in text in the chat, or at Force 13. Lights the message up in a nice orange for us. And just something to talk about.
We're losing you, Strat. I just want to come to David first because you've been posting some images on the ground. Here is one. David, what can you tell us about this image?
That is from one of our national TV outlets here in Australia. It's just highlighting how bad Dorian has been in the Bahamas. However, Nathan, a special welcome to those viewing on our Facebook page, and the city of Wilmington, North Carolina government. Time to put your emergency plans into effect. So that's from the city of Wilmington. I am monitoring the Twitter feed.
Yep. We are simulcasting on Facebook at this time. Yep, Strat.
It's just something for conversation. I'm not sure if it's just me, but within the past 2 to 3 hours, maybe in that 1 minute imagery, it looks like the eye is contracting a bit in size. Is that something that you're seeing as well?
All right, we can do an interesting checkup on that. We'll go. The eye grew a lot earlier today, so I'm just going to look back 5 hours to that earlier imagery and see if we can make any comparisons. It's not loading for me right now, so I can't do that.
Yeah, I'm just noticing the imagery is being shown on stream. It looks like the eye has been contracting within the past couple of hours or so. All of the convection on the southern side of the storm has kind of lit up again as well. And, I'm just looking at the images being posted by David. I'm assuming those are from the Bahamas, right, David?
Yes, Nathan, I'm going to bring up on the screen a video of the scene in Freeport.
All right, the eye has shrunk about 10% in the last 5 hours, Strat.
Okay, so it wasn't just me being delusional looking at. There actually has been some sort of difference that's occurred.
David, you're on.
Okay, this was the video was posted, and the updated up to data, and sorry, it's not allowing me to.
Well, it seems quite clear what's going on there. More storm surge action by the looks of things.
There we are.
And those strong winds. Wow.
And you can see the trees. So that is definitely. So there's only a very brief one.
And this is the kind of action that you get from a storm like this, and on those islands, some parts of those islands will have experienced a 23-foot storm surge. That is pretty high.
And that's an absolutely terrifying thought, considering the maximum elevation of the whole island of Grand Bahama is 40 feet above sea level.
And that's on the southwestern part of it.
Yeah, and combine that with high tides on this 18 to 23 feet potential storm surge above normal levels, and you could potentially see, I'm not sure the whole geography of the island, but all of the coastline significantly far inland through the island completely inundated by storm surge at certain points in time. Because you see this from Freeport, and that's not where the strongest of the storm hit, fortunately, the most populated area. And you can just presume, based on someone being able to potentially get slightly outside like that is not nearly the worst situation that occurred in that area at all either. And there was a news report that came out from the Associated Press that Dorian has killed at least 5 people in the Bahamas. The Prime Minister had said that they are in the midst of a historic tragedy.
No doubt.
So there are 5 confirmed deaths with Dorian in the Bahamas at this point in time, and that number will very unfortunately be very likely to continue to rise through the next half a week to a week or so as the storm moves away and we're able to get some more accurate numbers actually start to come in as resources are finally able to reach the islands, because you can be almost certain that nothing's able to reach Abaco even still at this point in time. and you could say the same thing with Grand Bahama as well.
Nathan, this Carolina Department of Transport, they've put out a posting. The I-26 lane reverse from Somerville east towards I-526. So I don't know whether they change the direction of traffic.
Yeah, and I just want to clear up some confusion. There's a lot of people trying to say that this is going west in the chat. It is not going west at this point in time. It's almost completely stationary with maybe a tinge movement to the very north or northwesterly direction. It's not going due west at this point in time.
It's not going anywhere.
By that. It's pretty much still. So anyone that's saying it's due west in our chat right now is that is an inaccurate statement to say.
Well, I can say in the last 20 minutes or so, I mean, I don't like to make statements on too little time passing, but it's moved about another mile north in that 20-minute period. The latest estimate for the center of the eye, this is getting interesting. I don't really know why the National Hurricane Center initialized the storm about 10 miles south of where the center of the eye actually is, but they did in their update at the start of this hour. But that distance is increasing. It's now about 12 miles north of the forecast track.
Maybe they were forecast more tricolor wobbles of the eye to get bigger. Maybe they might only guess. Or maybe in a radar or a satellite precision error.
Back to that radar imagery again, you can just see how terrible that western eye wall is looking now. But is that, to you, Isaac, could this be evidence? Is this an eye wall replacement cycle that's unfolding? Because there is what looks like what might be another eye wall there coming in.
Let me go ahead and pause that. I mean, it looks like I wouldn't say it's an eye wall replacement cycle. I think it's just a moat that's forming to the western side, the weaker side of it, and perhaps letting in some dry air, or something of the sorts get in. Or this could be completely due to uprolling from the storm being in the same general area for the past 12, 24 hours or so, give or take. And there could be just uprolling those cooler sea surface temperatures, and that's why it's looking like this. I remember Typhoon Trami, I think it was, looked something similar to this on satellite after it stalled in the same area for a few hours after becoming a Cat 5. So it could be just uprolling those cooler sea surface temperatures, and that's why it's looking like this.
Back to the infrared imagery, the eye temperature still hovering around 10, 11 degrees Celsius right now, which is good because it started the hour at about 15 degrees and I thought it was taking a hike again, but the eye temperature is wobbling just as much as the storm's movement is, really, so not much that we can take out of that, just to try and establish an average trend over time. And the trend is that the eye is gradually weakening at the moment. We saw on that radar there, the western side looking extremely weak at the moment. And you look on the infrared imagery, just get a zoom out picture of the whole thing there. Yeah, not looking anywhere near as good as it did this morning. Cloud tops building in a bit north and eastern side in the latest frames, but there's still some significant gaps northwest and northeast.
Yeah, and just in terms of the eye, we've been seeing that weakening trend with, unfortunately, a slow cooling. But it's hard to see how definitive that trend is just because we've seen those oscillation swings. We went from teens down to 8 degrees, up to 16, down to 9, up to 14. We were at 8 earlier in the hour. Now we're back at 11. So, the volatility that's occurring with the eye temperature is definitely making it difficult to get a better read. But, I mean, at least for now, we're kind of starting to see that slowing
it's
trend.
totally hopping around at 14 again.
Oh, it's like a ping pong or a yo-yo. You can't find out where it's really going next right now. I mean, unfortunately, at least in terms of convection, there's starting to see some blowups back on the southern and eastern sides, but we are fortunately seeing that pretty significant weakness on the western eye wall. Even though you see the stronger cloud tops blowing up around most of the system, you still see on that very western eye wall that potential gap forming up. And hopefully that starts to crack open and fully expose itself. But only time will tell at this point in time. We're going to continue to monitor that very closely. I know we're talking about potential threats to Florida as well.
Yeah, as of the 5 p.m. update, I just want to point out that the National Hurricane Center's wind radius takes tropical storm force winds within 5 miles of West Palm Beach and Jupiter. So this is right on the edge right now. If the storm moves just 5 miles west, you're going to get tropical storm force winds beginning there in those two locations. Of course, it might not even need to take that, because as the storm stalls and weakens, the wind field is expanding. So tropical storm force winds might start occurring there soon anyway. And those are minimal tropical storm force winds. The extent of stronger tropical storm force winds of over 58 miles an hour, those only extend out only just beyond the Grand Bahama at the minute, actually, believe it or not. So still a while before those winds start to affect Florida. And the hurricane force winds, to be honest, looking at the NHC, Freeport even is only on the edge of hurricane force winds according to their graphic.
Yeah, it just goes, to show how expansive this storm could be in terms of winds almost reaching Florida, and any oscillation to the west or just any expansion of the wind field could push it over the brink, and then potentially how small a hurricane force wind field is at the same time. I was wondering if we want to go over the warnings again, just because there's probably a whole slew of new people here that might be looking for that information.
Yeah, well, a storm surge warning is in effect for Lantana to Altamaha Sound. Just looking for the graphic that I can show you as we go through these warnings. There's so many things that we're going through right now because there's a few other systems active. But here is the National Hurricane Center's latest warning cone. A storm surge watch for north of Deerfield Beach to south of Lantana and Altamaha Sound to South Santee River. A hurricane warning for Grand Bahama and the Abacus Islands, obviously. Jupiter Inlet to Ponte Vedra Beach. Hurricane watch for north of Deerfield Beach to Jupiter Inlet and north of Ponte Vedra Beach to South Santee River. Tropical storm warning for north of Deerfield Beach to Jupiter Inlet, and a tropical storm watch for north of Golden Beach to Deerfield Beach and Lake Okeechobee. Not looked at local conditions for a while, so I'm just going to have a look back there again. There were some flood warnings earlier. I'm sure they'll still be in effect for a few days, obviously. Let's see, there's a special marine warning just off Naples right now. Further north, there's some flood warnings, as I pointed out earlier today. I'll read those out for you in just a few moments. Just looking for anything that might be more immediate. Doesn't look like it at the moment. No severe thunderstorm warnings or tornado warnings or anything like that. But they do say that a brief tornado could be possible along the eastern coast of Florida tonight, apparently.
Won't surprise me with the scattered showers in the west there, hitting eastern Florida. So we already had a tornado warning yesterday, I believe it was, and near Naples happened due to, I think, the outer scattered showers from Dorian. So it's definitely within the realm of possibility.
Yeah, and then not even including, all the havoc that we're dealing with here right now, Dorian, of course, with the Bahamas and potentially the southeastern United States, although for Florida, at least, impacts could already be starting. We're also dealing with a slew of other systems as well that could be threatening land. We have 2 Western Pacific systems that are threatening land right now, and we also have an invest in the Atlantic that could be threatening the Mexican-Texas border as well in the near future. So, like we say, we're right around peak season. It's September. And, things pick up out of nowhere. We went from nothing for most of August to the most active time of the year in almost a snap of a finger, really.
Yeah,
And
pretty much, right.
Yeah, and if you want me to go through the rest of the warnings right now, I can do that as well if you want me to do that. just to get some descriptions out there for people, Nathan.
Well, first of all, I just need to point out some evacuation messages that were put out earlier today in South Carolina. People probably know this already, but just in case, they've issued a civil emergency message due to the possible threat of the hurricane. The governor is mandating an evacuation effective at noon today, so that happened earlier. But just in case you didn't know, these areas are being evacuated. Charleston, Dorchester, and Berkeley counties evacuation zones A, B, C, D, and G. Colleton County zones A and B. Beaufort County zone A. Jasper County zone A. And I think there's another one here, Horry and Georgetown evacuation zone A as well. So that happened earlier today in South Carolina. The mandatory evacuation began at noon today. Looking back at Isaac's imagery, whilst I go through a few flood warnings as well. So a river flood warning remains in effect for the St. Johns River above Lake Harney near Geneva, and for the St. Johns River at Astor. A river flood warning, that's the same one. A flood warning continuing for the Withlacoochee River at Holder and the Peace River at Bartow. And that is it for the Central Florida region. And a coastal flood warning in effect until 2 p.m. Wednesday for inland waterways of inland northeast Florida, including the St. Johns River Basin and tributaries.
Yeah, and overall, just a very bad situation. If you're issued evacuation orders by local officials, take them. It's for your own safety. Leave in an orderly process to not clog things up too much and create too much havoc and danger for other people, especially if you're in other southeastern states like Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. You still have some time if you're ordered to evacuate, so you don't need to. You obviously have speedily prepare to leave, but you don't need to rush and go crazy to leave within the next 2 hours. Obviously, you can get ready tonight. Have a good night's sleep and still have enough time to get out tomorrow without too much struggle, probably. And like we just said, if you're ordered an evacuation by local officials, make sure to listen to it. They know the best that they have about your local geography and the risks posed for potential flooding and other storm-related issues. So they're doing it for your safety. If they issue an evacuation order, please listen to it. We implore you to do so.
You can see on the imagery just how the darker colours are coming and going in the eye. So there's been points where the darker colours have barely been there, and other points where they're really coming in. And it's really going to and fro right now. The latest eye temperature is 15 degrees. So it's hovering from 9 half an hour ago to 15 to 9 to 15 roughly every half hour right now. So whether this is a sign of the storm weakening or not, we're not sure at this point. Probably maintaining for the time being. But it just can't be sustainable for much longer, we would think. Unless it starts moving.
No, totally. And just for reference for people, the darker colors in the eyes, those darker grays, less whites, denote warmer temperatures in the eye. When you see those kind of whites and grays kind of mix in more, that denotes cooler temperatures. But when you see those like darker grays and kind of blackish come out, that means you're seeing warmer eye temperature within the storm.
Yeah, just another new image coming in there as well. Another 15 in the northwestern side of the eye. It's remarkable. I'm just seeing how far it's moved in half an hour. The movement has been northwest by 2 or 3 miles. Very slow movement. It's going northeast, then northwest, then goodness knows where else. But generally, if we're going to extrapolate back 6 hours, 5 or 6 hours, let's just get another check to see how far it's moved in that time. So this is more important than what we're getting on the instantaneous readings, obviously. This is a trend that's built over the course of 5 hours, and I can tell you that in that period of time, the storm has so far moved. It's still due north. even though we've just had a northwest jog, but the overall trend is due north. It's moved 6 miles. So it's been doing 1 mile an hour, moving north for the last 5 hours overall.
Yeah, and I mean, fortunately, from the trend we were seeing last night, at least, for parts of the United States and for Freeport as well, when we're seeing it moving west in between 5 and 6 miles due west to this kind of halt and move to the northwest to kind of northerly motion, very beneficial for Freeport, the most populated part of Grand Bahama, escaping the worst of conditions.
The situation
but
that we're
obviously
looking at right
extremely
now,
severe impacts still occurring.
the situation we're looking at right now could still have been worse. The National Hurricane Center yesterday expected that the storm would retain Category 5 status until tonight. Thankfully, it lost Category 5 status earlier this afternoon and is now a mid-range Category 4. That is still only 15 miles off being a Category 5 at this point. So it is still incredibly dangerous, destructive, damaging, and inundating when it comes to storm surge. What also has helped Freeport, though, is that it's on the southern side of the island, and the biggest storm surge will be blowing round from the northeast, round the top of the eye wall towards the southwest. So it's the northern shores of the Grand Bahama that will have got the highest storm surge.
Yeah, and just an update in terms of governmental action. The state of Virginia has just declared a state of emergency. Less than an hour ago, this was declared for parts of Virginia, just to free up more resources. So that is the 5th state that's had a state of emergency declared in preparation for Dorian's potential impact.
That's pretty crazy. If you've got any comments or questions for us right now, send us a message. Start your message with Force 13 all in text. It will appear, it will light up for us in the chat section on our stream. Anyone else have any thoughts at this time? Oh, everyone's gone. Okay. Just me and you, Strat. Fine.
Oh, God.
Not a problem.
I mean, something I will say, though, is that, we're still watching the trend to see things. That is interesting to see. The latest drop zone in the eye from AF309, despite flight level pressures being measured in the mid-940s, actually recorded a surface pressure of 939 millibars.
Okay.
So that is very contradictory to early thoughts that the pressure may have actually been closer to the mid-940s.
Well, maybe it was briefly.
Maybe. But since that drop zone came in, things definitely changed a good amount. So, definitely oscillations in strength at this point in time. Monitoring to see that Western Gap opens up. In terms of other potential damage news, emergency communications in Grand Bahama have collapsed as of a couple hours ago. The numbers are down and are not working at this point in time anymore as of 2 hours ago. And a couple hours before that, Bahamas said that they would not be able to send in emergency resources until conditions improve. So we're continuing to monitor what could be an absolutely catastrophic situation unfold. There's reported
Nope, we've lost Strat's signal there.
Feet.
Just repeat that sentence, Strat.
There's reported video believed to be of the Grand Bahama Police Headquarters showing complete inundation of the whole parking lot, at least 3 to 4 feet flooded completely. I've seen, and I don't know the accuracy of such numbers, but I've seen reports of Grand Bahama being 57% inundated at this point in time.
That would make sense.
I can't independently verify that myself, but just knowing the geography that we have and how long the storm's been over the island at this point in time, such a number would be very reasonable to say. And about Abaco as well, Greater Abaco, I wouldn't be surprised to see a similar number, but with much more severe wind impacts as well for parts of it. Just considering that Dorian made landfall in Grand Abaco at its peak intensity as the strongest system ever recorded in the Atlantic outside of the Gulf of Mexico and Caribbean Sea. 185 miles an hour, pressure of 910 millibars at that point in time. And we're just continuing to monitor for updates. Reconnaissance is flying around the storm. We have 2 planes in right now. One of them, AF309, shows that those tropical storm force sustained winds are very close to being on the surface. You have 45 knot flight level winds to 50 knot plus, less than 15 miles off the surface from West Palm Beach all the way up towards past Jupiter. So a significant area of tropical storm force winds just offshore at this point in time. And it's pretty much a stationary system. That center fix they got was actually
not moving.
The first one was further north and east to the current one, so it looks like it had extremely slight motion, potentially at the center of the eye, to the very west southwest in the past hour or so, but almost no movement. Fortunately, it's much easier for them to get drops in the eye to get accurate pressure readings, just because the system isn't moving at all. So it's not like 2 days ago when the system was moving at 10 miles an hour, and the eye was a bit smaller in size and much more erratic, where it's much more difficult for them to get those proper drops in. But we're starting to see more data trickle in from AF309 from potential coastal tropical storm force winds to NOAA 2. Or it's going around the periphery to see how far out strong tropical storm force winds extend. Frustratingly for both of these so far, though, minimum sea level pressure estimates have cut out for AF309 whenever it gets to the eye, and SFMR readings have cut out for NOAA 2 whenever it gets close to the eye.
No way.
So, I mean, at least we have both of them to reference off each other.
We've just passed 6 p.m. The 6 p.m. update is out from the National Hurricane Center. No change in the intensity, 145 miles an hour, pressure 940 millibars. Extremely dangerous Dorian continues to bring life-threatening conditions to Grand Bahama Island. Residents should remain in shelter on the island as they are currently experiencing the southern eye wall of Dorian. Residents in the Abacos should also continue to stay in their shelter until conditions subside later tonight. How long have potentially hurricane conditions been occurring on that island? Made landfall yesterday at 12:45 p.m. Eastern Time. So, hurricane force winds have probably been occurring there for 36
30
hours?
plus hours.
Wow.
Yeah,
Something
about
like
that much.
And considering just the current very slow grind of movement until this picks up, parts of Abaco Island could still be seeing hurricane force winds for potentially another 12 hours or so before this really starts to move. Latest frames show, that it's still barely moving at all, just a very tinge to the west, it seems, which is reflected in the recon drop zones. But regardless, we're seeing almost no movement occur. And then for parts of Abaco that were hit by the worst of this, especially the very thin parts of the island in terms of, from west to east coast where there could have been complete inundation, there's still heavy rainfall and surge still occurring at this point in time there as well. And then for parts of Grand Bahama, we're seeing very similar circumstances occur. All in all, just a very bad situation that's continuing to unfold.
Yep. And they warn of wind gusts still of 170 miles per hour. That is crazy. Storm surge. They aren't expecting the full 23 feet anymore. They are still expecting 12 to 18 feet above normal tide levels with higher destructive waves. These hazards will continue over Grand Bahama Island through much of this evening, causing extreme destruction on the island. A recent observation from Settlement Point on the far western tip of Grand Bahama indicated a sustained wind of 54 miles an hour with a gust to 66.
Yeah, and we just got a message in the chat, just a question to read out. Someone said, any possibility of something else driving the storm? I think they mean like steering current. And if that were to kind of nick off and miss the storm, where else could the storm go in that regard?
Sorry, what was that? I was just reading another question there about northeast movement, which not really is occurring at the moment. It's mainly northerly.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, right now, at least the past hour or so, we've seen very slight westward movement, just barely to the west-southwest, according to recon. So the question
Really?
was,
Oh, in the last hour,
yeah,
yeah, maybe, yeah.
the drop zones have shifted barely. It's like people are gonna say, "Oh, that's such a huge difference." It looks like it's a mile or less on the recon. The question I was referring to, someone said, "Is there a possibility of?" I guess they're assuming the trough of the ridge. I think presumably for this part, the trough missing the storm,
Ooh,
and if that were to happen, where could it go?
I don't think so. Thomas, are you
Yeah.
still with us right now? You just came in there.
I
Any thoughts?
I am with. Thoughts on what? I'm sorry, I was finishing up.
Not again. The trough, whether it might miss the storm, is a question there.
No.
I didn't think
Trough
so
will not
either.
miss the storm. The northerly movement that's already began overall is due to the trough, and honestly, at this point, I've been forecasting these storms over the past couple of days, and what I'm noticing is with this northerly movement, general model consensus shows it's going to basically continue this northerly motion very slowly over the next 12 to 24 hours before really beginning to accelerate. But it looks like a Florida landfall at this point is exceptionally unlikely, and looks like impacts, at least for southern Florida, could be a lot less severe than was initially thought.
Any word on Flagler Beach is a comment that I get there. That's in northern Florida, isn't it? I believe so. But I can't really say anything specific apart from the whole message that we're giving for Florida from West Palm Beach all the way up to Georgia is that hurricane force conditions are possible. Storm surge of up to 7 feet is possible. Rainfall amounts of 6 inches is also possible, and people should be preparing for all of those eventualities at this time. And that really should be coming close to completion tonight, especially the further south you are. Anywhere south of Cape Canaveral could get tropical storm conditions in before tomorrow morning, depending on what exactly happens with the storm. And then by tomorrow evening, further north beyond Cape Canaveral, will probably receive inclement conditions from the storm as well. I'm seeing a lot of activity along the Naples area right now as well. As we look on the screen there towards the bottom left, Fort Myers as well. Could be some thunderstorms occurring there. I've not. I did check the National Weather Service not very long ago. They didn't have anything at that time, but it's looking interesting down there. They don't have anything right now. And we are looking out for the potential for severe thunderstorms over southern and central Florida tonight. 1 or 2 isolated tornadoes could be possible along the coast of Florida. And apart from that, I think we've just seen a new flood advisory coming into effect in the Miami-Dade area. Yes, this happened at 6 p.m. National Weather Service have issued a urban and small stream flood advisory for northern Miami-Dade County and southern Broward County until 8 p.m. this evening. National Weather Service meteorologists reported heavy rain around different portions of metropolitan South Florida due to thunderstorms. This will cause urban and small stream flooding. Up to 2 inches of rain have already fallen. Some locations that will experience flooding include Miami, Hialeah, Fort Lauderdale, Pembroke Pines, and Hollywood. Additional rainfall of 1 to 2 inches is expected over the area as well. This is pretty much expected, isn't it?
At this point, yes.
And again, the tropical storm force winds are extremely close to the Palm Beach area of Florida. About 15 miles, was it, Strat? About 5 miles, I think we had, actually.
Storm force winds, if you look at recon, are way less than 10 miles offshore at this point. You could say 5 miles offshore at most as of the recent past. It could be closer potentially. And just an update on recon. NOAA 2 has chosen not to go to the northern periphery of tropical storm force winds is instead doing another pass in right now. It's doing a north to south past the eye wall. We'll get that in 20 minutes or so. And AF 309 is going to do a southwest to northeast pass as well that we're going to get within the next 40 minutes or so.
Thomas, what are we seeing on your imagery right now?
So this is overall the. My apologies. This is overall the.
All right, take 3. Okay, well, we seem to have lost touch with Thomas there. I've no idea what just happened.
My apologies. Okay, I'm back. A few issues on my end of things. Okay, so what we're seeing here is this is the radar imagery from the Miami radar, and what can be seen here is that eye wall. You can see it is very robust on its eastern side, but you can see on the western side things not looking so hot for it, and some downright fractures even being seen, quickly being paired, I guess, if you will. You can also see this dry slot in between what looks like could be the formation of concentric eye walls. So very interesting to see. And you can see outer bands definitely impacting the Florida coastline right now. And with that being said, we can also tell tropical storm force winds will likely be arriving, if not have arrived, in numerous locations in Florida very shortly.
A reminder of the warnings. A storm surge warning is in effect for Lantana to Altamaha Sound. A storm surge watch for north of Deerfield Beach to south of Lantana and Altamaha Sound to South Santee River. A hurricane warning for Grand Bahama and the Abacos Islands in the northwestern Bahamas and Jupiter Inlet to Ponte Vedra Beach. A hurricane watch for north of Deerfield Beach to Jupiter Inlet and north of Ponte Vedra Beach to South Santee River. A tropical storm warning for north of Deerfield Beach to Jupiter Inlet, and a tropical storm watch for north of Golden Beach to Deerfield Beach and Lake Okeechobee. I'd be surprised if we saw any extension in the warnings after this now tonight. We'll probably see some more warnings start to appear tomorrow morning, early morning. Depending on what the storm does, of course.
Yeah, I would completely concur with that. Yeah, just because, people would be like, oh, why isn't there warnings among all the way up to North Carolina and Virginia at this point in time if, the track looks so certain at this point with model accordance that we're going to get so close to the coastline, potential landfall in North Carolina. A simple explanation is this time frame. The guidelines for warnings mean that it has to be within a certain time frame of potential impact before those warnings and watches can go out. So probably very late tonight at 11 a.m. or early tomorrow is when you might start to see watches extend up the Carolina coastline even more from the rest of South Carolina into parts of North Carolina. And then maybe later tomorrow or early Wednesday, see some things start to pop up in Virginia as well. I wouldn't be too surprised, though, that if at 11 a.m., though, or 5 a.m., hurricane warnings are extended up parts of the coast of Georgia just to match the time frame of impact as well.
Eye temperature continuing to oscillate wildly. We've had it 9 degrees one half hour, and half an hour later we've had it 15 degrees, then 9, then 15. It's numbers like that. At the moment it's 11 degrees Celsius. The eye temperature often indicates to us whether the storm is strong, whether it's weakening. Usually if the eye temperature lowers, it's weakening, and if it increases, obviously it's strengthening. It peaked with an eye temperature of 22 degrees just before the storm actually peaked with winds of 185 miles an hour the other day. But now we're looking about 11 degrees. Thomas, what is going on here? Is it weakening or not?
I'm fairly certain it's gradually weakening, and I think it's going to continue to do this throughout the rest of its life. Eye temperature oscillations are likely because it's trying to mix out maybe some moisture that's trying to get into the eye. It's really trying not to get clouds in the eye. It's been very good about making sure that it is a cleared out eye, and I think that may not remain for too much longer. But we're seeing these spikes in temperature, and if you actually look, you can see them kind of circulating around the eye.
Yeah.
But overall, I think that for over half of the eye, the temperature hasn't oscillated that much. It's just which part of the eye has those really warm temperatures is the part of the eye that seems to be the strongest, if you will, the part that's most efficiently mixing out that air. So as of right now, I'd say that eye temperature may not be the best indication of what this storm is doing. But fluctuations in intensity are definitely possible up and down due to an eye wall replacement cycle that could be occurring. But overall, I think a weakening trend is what we're going to be seeing throughout the rest of this storm's life. I think its days of getting stronger are nearly over.
Something that we're looking at on Isaac's radar in the last hour, it was starting to appear to me as though on the western side it is looking extremely frail, but you've still got that other band there that's looking much stronger. Is that a potential eye wall?
I think so. I definitely think so, and I think that the West Palm Beach radar or the Miami radar is just too far out to see the other side completely. But I think that that is the beginning of a concentric eye wall beginning to choke off the western side. So I think an eye wall replacement cycle could be occurring, which at this point in the storm's life, since it is already weakening, is very bad news. Expansion of wind field could occur. The eye could get larger, and also additionally, it could really allow it to hold on to some of its strength for longer, since the structural integrity of the storm, as we know, has been kind of going down with that inner eye wall for a while. So getting a new replacement eye wall that's more robust would definitely be bad news.
Something also to note right now is that the southern side of the storm is noticeably stronger now than the northern side, from cloud tops at least. Any reason for this?
I'm not 100% sure what it would be, but I think it's wind shear is beginning to pick up. Shear is expected to increase over the next couple of days as the storm does head northward. It'll be shear pressing from the north, pushing everything to the south. I'm not sure if that's why this is happening now. I haven't had a chance to look at shear, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's what's going on right now. I'll be getting back to you on that in just a moment.
Well, the National Hurricane Center are putting out hourly advisories at this point, hourly updates. Their next intermediate advisory is at 8 p.m. with a full advisory coming up at 11. Strat.
Yeah, I was going to say, just from what I'm able to see, earlier imagery is that it's in a very kind of just small spot where the center is in a weaker area of shear. So that's beneficial to the storm, at least at this point in time, to kind of slow weakening down.
We seem to have a lot of problems with microphones tonight. We've lost Strat. Thomas.
So I'm seeing shear right now. Shear on the northern side is very strong, 25 to 30 to maybe even 35 knots, with it heading into an area of 40 knots later in its life, probably within the next 48 hours or so. It'll be well into 40 knots or even 45 knots. But right now, the northern side and the eastern side are both in quite a bit of shear. The southern side and especially the southwestern side is in the lowest amount of shear right now. So that's probably why it's the strongest side, is those cloud tops on the northern side are being sheared away.
Yeah, and we are about to get some new data points in soon. NOAA 2 is about to do a north to south eye pass. We're going to get that update in less than 10 minutes just about. And interestingly enough, AF309 is zigzagging towards the center of the storm. I'm not really sure why. Typically, the recon planes do a straight line towards the center. It's going right, left, right, left, right, left within the past 20 minutes or so to approach the center of the storm. I'm very intrigued as to why that's happening, though, because I have no reason to know why. I've never seen anything like that happen before on watching the recon planes.
All right, send in your questions live to us and we can answer them. Start your message with Force 13 all in text in the chat section of our stream tonight, and we'll try and get some questions through. There was one a little earlier that I just saw. I've just lost it now, unfortunately. Here is one though. Chances of reorganization once it gets back in open water.
Sea surface temperatures for this.
It's not moving is the issue for its storm strength.
But once it gets into warmer water, the chances of re-strengthening, if it gets down to, let's say, a low-end Category 3, a high-end Category 2, which is unlikely at this point. If it does that, it could re-strengthen into a mid-range to high-end Category 3, or even a low-end Category 4. But if it does stay as a mid-range to low-end Category 4, I don't think that re-strengthening is overly likely. I think shear is going to overpower it. Strat, as a response to your question on why the plane would be zigzagging back and forth, the only logical reason I can come up with is that it would be because they're trying to be a lot more thorough with where the maximum winds is, what the maximum sustained winds are within the storm.
They're not in the center of the storm. They're at the southwestern quadrant.
Well, they could be collecting other data as well. I'm not 100% sure what it would be, but I think it's just they're being more thorough. I don't know exactly why they're being more thorough with this particular pass, but this would obviously give them quite a few more data points to work with. So I'm curious to see why they're doing that. But I would think it's
just trying
to get just more accurate estimates, especially because at this point it's heading really close to land, and really at this point, relatively soon anyway, recon may not be quite as useful as radar observations and observations on land and buoys may become a lot more usable and useful. So maybe this is one of their final passes as well, and they're just being very thorough with it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a possibility. This one's already done 3 passes through the center, so this could be potentially the last pass it does for the night. And maybe they're just trying not to get in too close to the same time as NOAA too, because that's about to cross the eye right now, and maybe they're just trying to stall out a bit longer as well. We can't really have a definitive answer for that. Something I am noticing though is that cloud tops, at least especially on the southern side of the storm, are continuing to remain quite impressive at this point in time, and maybe trying to extend, at least compared to a few hours ago. Cloud tops look more impressive, and then we're just looking at the eye oscillations in temperature, as Tom was saying, potentially trying to fight out some extra moisture. So I'm very curious to see what the next recon pass has on pressure, because even though NOAA 2 got flight level pressure at 942 earlier, the drop zone from AF 309 that happened right around the same time got a surface pressure of 939 millibars. So I really want to see more data points come in for that regard.
Something else that's really intriguing as well is that the eye temperature, at least on my screen, looks to have decreased again, but it looks like there is a larger area than before of increased eye temperatures, if that makes sense. So while the highest temperature in the storm has decreased, there is a larger area of temperatures that are higher than they were before. So that's interesting. And with that southern side convection, I don't exactly know if this could be it attempting to just get a convective burst, which could either maintain its intensity or strengthen it slightly, or if this is just another one of those strange things that upwelling can do to storms, because upwelling can do a lot of strange things, especially once a storm is very well organized. So I'm intrigued to see what that's all about, but Recon's really going to tell us here in short order.
What we can say is that the storm is trending about 8 miles north of the National Hurricane Center's forecast track that they issued just over an hour ago. So it's still trending north and therefore east of what the forecast has been, and it's been doing that since 5 a.m. this morning. It's been trending north and east away from the National Hurricane Center track. Indeed, I think at the 5 a.m. advisory, the NHC wanted the storm to track pretty much directly over Freeport, which obviously we know didn't happen. Well, we'll see what happens in the next few hours. We still can't say which way this is going to go. Just to point out a few things elsewhere, in a moment somewhere. Okay, not there either. That's a close-up of the infrared imagery. But elsewhere we have Hurricane Juliet now. That has intensified further, now a Category 1 in the eastern Pacific. Tropical Depression or Storm, Tropical Storm 14W in the western Pacific. Partially exposed, by the way. Another one that's developed there. Tropical Depression 16W has formed just off the coast of Vietnam and is appearing to move slightly inland at the moment. The Japanese Meteorological Agency think it will move back out over the South China Sea. Not so sure about that.
And the JTWC rams it right into Vietnam and kills it in
Wow.
24 hours.
Big difference.
So,
Tropical Storm Ling
big
Ling
difference.
is the strongest system out there at the moment, just off the Philippines. A Signal 1 warning in effect for the Batanes Islands. This one could strike Korea as a significant typhoon. Invest 93W located, where exactly is this one? South, near the Micronesian Islands. And Invest 94, we don't have imagery for that one yet. And this is an earlier image, Navy image of Dorian. And there again, we have the National Hurricane Center track map. So there's so much else going on around the world at this point. And the other disturbances in the Atlantic. There are potentially 4 other systems that could form in the Atlantic in the next 5 days. And that is quite something. Let's just pop over there now before we head back to Dorian again along the screens here. So the first area of interest there on the screen, mark number 1, near Cape Verde. That's an 80% chance in the next 48 hours, 90% chance in 5 days. That one's going to move northwest, probably become a tropical storm. Expect to remain somewhat weak. Number 2 has a 60% chance there on the western part of the Gulf of Mexico, 70% chance in 5 days. That could become a tropical cyclone before striking the border of Texas and Mexico. And number 3, out there south of Bermuda, 40% chance of development in the next 5 days, 30% in 48 hours. That one's supposed to move towards the north or northeast. And also behind the African wave, number 4 is still over Africa right now, has a 40% chance of development in the next 5 days, and long-range models suggesting that that one could become a major hurricane in the second week of September. So that's something to watch out for long term. It's a crazy tropics out there right now, and we're keeping you up to date on all of it. Of course, the main feature by some big distance at the moment is Hurricane Dorian, and we'll be taking questions from you on that as well. Start your message with Force 13 all in text. Does it seem every time the eye tries to organize it can't when it interacts with the small island on the eastern side? Is a question we get there. I think that might be a coincidence.
Yeah, and it's something just know. I know we're before we get really back to questions. I know we mentioned that it was 8 miles off of the NHC track right now. I remember, was it an hour ago or so that we were saying it was 12 miles off. So has it righted itself a little bit?
It depends. I mean, these are estimates, and they're jumping around a bit, just like the storm's eye is.
It's wobbling.
Just now I'm getting a new estimate of 9 or 10 miles. So who knows at the moment. But the general movement in the last hour or two is northwest.
Yeah. And looks like Recon should update momentarily as well, so I'll be sure to bring that to you. It looks like it just has. I pass on NOAA 2 showing a minimum flight level pressure of 943.1, but that's contradictory to the recent drop zone, which happened at the same time that it was reporting minimum flight level pressures at the 942s. So I'm not sure how accurate the instrument is there right now, especially because their SFMR readings on NOAA 2 are also cutting out whenever it gets close to the center of the storm as well. So I'm kind of just eagerly waiting to see if AF 309 can get another drop zone into the center of the storm and get us another pressure reading through that as well, to give us potentially more accurate information. Just because of what I'm seeing with NOAA 2 so far compared to actual drop zone data, I'm a bit doubtful of the measurement instruments being used with it.
And with the erratic nature of the storm, it could be that it's just legitimately changed that much in the course of the short period of time between the drop zone and NOAA 2 moving in there. It's just, the storm is of a very erratic nature. Something else that I'm noticing on radar, a trend that I'm noticing, is these bursts of convection beginning, some of them actually over the Grand Bahama. and moving up through the storm before weakening as they go on the western side before initiation occurs off the coast of Grand Bahama again of convection on that eye wall. So it's kind of interesting that a land interaction on the eye wall directly actually could be hindering its ability to fire off that convection over land and keep the eye wall sustained.
That's rather interesting.
Especially because before we were going into this, a lot of people were saying, oh, well, these are just really small islands, very close to the surface. They're just going to be pebbles. They're not really going to impact the storm at all. But they could be actually impacting it a bit, just based off of what we've been seeing at this point in time for the last 24 hours. We saw the pressure rise a few millibars while Dorian was over Abaco Island fully, and then it dropped a couple millibars again. One is in between Abaco and Grand Bahama. Obviously, it's risen since then. With deterioration of the structure, and what Thomas is noting with the convection bursts and fades could indicate that somehow what people would presume to be relatively small landmass that shouldn't have an impact actually is.
Well, I think that the reason it is because you couple the fact that Dorian was, especially at the beginning, very, very small, with the fact that it's also nearly motionless at this time, while the eye wall itself is over this land, could be the reason. We haven't had many storms that have moved through the Bahamas, especially at the intensity Dorian once was. And then to also see a storm move this slowly isn't overly common either, and to have the eye wall stalling over land for this long is very uncommon and catastrophic for the Grand Bahama, but also probably weakening the eye wall some, as the eye wall now is directly experiencing friction, not just other parts of the storm outside of the eye wall.
Yeah, and that is obviously 100% correct. I'm waiting right now for that next recon pass to come in as well. Probably going to get that within the next 20 minutes or so, because the reconnaissance plane righted itself from that zigzagging motion, has gone straight towards the center of the storm for a southwest to northeast pass. We're going to get that information within the next 20 minutes, so hopefully before the end of the hour. But while we're waiting for that stuff and whatnot, there's a lot of people in the chat. If you guys want to have any questions answered, we'd like to have the chat field a question to some extent, because we want to know what people want to know. Start your question with Force 13 all in text, or at Force 13 helps us see the question, lights it up in a nice bright orange. And someone's asking, is Dorian moving north right now, or is it just a wobble?
We don't know.
It's going slow that we can't really tell, really. It's moved maybe 10 miles in the past 4 hours or so, right?
Yeah, very slow indeed. And I don't really know what to say at this point, to be honest. Well, what we can say is that a lot of people have been predicting things with this storm, and still anyone could be right. It could still move further west. It could still move further north. It could still possibly have a slight northeastward jog. I must say, looking at the very latest imagery here, there might be a slight westward jog there.
I mean, that would be indicative of the AF309 recon passage, showing very slight movement to the west-southwest back towards Grand Bahama from 2 to 1 hour ago. I want to see if the center fix that they get now indicates something similar to that motion continuing. But it looks like the edge of the eye might be starting to come back over parts of Grand Bahama again.
Very soon, if it keeps up, yeah.
It is also noticeable, just looking at the more long-range imagery over the past several hours or so, that deeper convection has definitely blown up again around the whole center of the storm compared to the start of the frames that you're showing on the stream right now. Initially, there are only mostly oranges and a little bit of yellows, especially on the western side, and now there's a deep red around most of the storm, with some darker reds starting to circle around the southern half as well.
There was. Sorry about that. I've just loaded the visible now.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was still there while I was commentating on it, but still a marked difference. If we didn't have the pressure readings and such, you would, and wind decrease that we know of, you'd assume that the storm would have been intensifying, but it's actually weakened a bit further since then. Fortunately, I'm very curious to see what the next drop zone gets, though. Just because based on what we've been seeing, I'm not fully trustworthy of the NOAA 2 pressure readings, just because other systems on it have been cutting off during its eye passes as well. Similar things have been happening with the AF309, though, with its pressure readings too. But fortunately, its drop zones are verifying, and we're able to see those to see the exact numbers that they're giving us.
Despite this slightly southwest movement here, though, the eye is looking a lot more lopsided, but the cloud tops are continuing to get better on the south side. I've no idea what is going on at this point. We're in some different world here with this storm, where, well, all the rules have gone out of the window so far.
And
those
someone's
later
asking,
frames, the eye is looking a lot more ragged in that last frame in particular. And but despite that, at the same time, I've seen there's been big upticks, tightening of the eye wall, massive increases of convection wrapping round in those last frames. So the eye's looking a lot worse, but the eye wall's looking a lot better. So where do we stand with this now?
We're standing with waiting for another recon pass, I guess.
I suppose we are.
Someone's asking, what is the latest eye temperature too? We had
I must say, it looks a
9
lot
degrees
better than
earlier.
it did before. We got to point this out. But one thing that we can't avoid is that recon observations will and do take precedent over any satellite observations. That goes for direction, that goes for its wind speeds, that goes for its pressure. So anything that recon says, they're more direct observations than what we have from looking from above, from thousands of miles into space on satellite imagery. The recon planes know better than any of us at this time.
Yeah, and what is the latest eye temperature as well on satellite imagery? At least,
Yeah, so
no
again,
recons,
it is still
obviously,
going up and
significantly
down.
warmer.
It is still going up and down. We had a lot of 15 earlier.
We've had the oscillations.
We've had 11. We've had 9. At the moment, we are getting 12.
So still very volatile at this point in time.
Yeah, but we're in another phase here where the area of 12-degree eye temperatures are extremely small.
Yeah, and someone else
For
asking,
instance, just to point out, most of the eye, apart from the 1 or 2 warm spots, most of the eye is sub-zero now.
Yeah, and we've been seeing those oscillations of mostly sub-zero to at least a third to half above zero for quite some time now throughout the day. Someone else is asking, do we have anything to compare in terms of precedent with a storm with this little movement?
A stronger Joaquin. Joaquin even moved quicker than this.
Yeah, I feel like
Nathan.
one of the comparisons that hasn't been mentioned at all is Joaquin, despite the fact that it did a similar stalling motion over the Bahamas.
It moved quicker than this did.
And
David.
David had something?
Yeah.
I have 2 questions off Facebook. Jared Martin, he posted, just say the hurricane continues to move to Florida and cuts across the state. What cities do you think it would go over first? And the second one is from Bojoin. Can a hurricane losing intensity over land regain strength over sea at the speed this thing is going to do? Regain intensity, according to Google, with a smaller eye in the area, high winds become smaller, so that the balance steady hurricane should have a high intensity or maximum service wind.
So the first question was about the storm moving over Florida, right?
Yes.
Well, that's not going to happen. It now seems pretty much certain that the storm will be brushing across the coast of Florida. It could still get very close. It could get to Matthew distance. It could get even closer than that. Small chance. Chances are decreasing of it getting closer than Matthew did. But this storm, don't forget, is stronger than Matthew. And I'm not sure how the wind fields compare at this point. I assume this storm is still quite a bit smaller than Matthew's wind field was.
At any rate, though, the wind field is going to expand as time goes on, though. If you just for example, especially as it starts to climb up the East Coast too. The long range models, once you get to 3+ days, show this wind field getting potentially massive. But that's something that the main focus shouldn't be on right now at all. Someone's asking, not directly about the storm, but do you think we'll see another major hurricane this season in the Atlantic, since it's pretty active right now?
Yeah, there could be
I think
one
we went
next
over it
week.
earlier. Yeah, the long-range models are trying to show this wave that's not the 80% chance to form right now, but the one after potentially reaching major hurricane status. Someone else is asking, is the eye wall replacement cycle over?
It's never over.
There's been an eye wall replacement cycle potentially trying to happen for the better part of 2 days at this point, and just had little to no progress, really. Although the eye is starting to look more ragged in those latest frames.
Yeah, this is just something I can't figure out right now. A more raggedy eye, but the eye wall is really blowing up in the latest frames. Whether that is just a reaction to a disintegrating eye, if it is indeed disintegrating, or whether it's back on again for potential intensification phase. But one thing is for sure, it is staying in the same place for an extended period of time. We're getting towards the evening hours now, so that's when we could possibly see some even bigger impacts on the storm from upwelling. The energy supply will eventually run out if the storm continues to refuse to move. When that will be, we still haven't reached that point yet, clearly.
Yeah, and we were talking, it looks like the eye is actually trying to come back over land in parts of Grand Bahama right now too. Kind of on that northern peninsula, it sticks out a bit. It's moved almost nil for the past several hours at this point, because any movement to the north that it could have done has basically been negated in the past hour or two by kind of a west-southwest, a very small movement from that as well. You see on the long-range imagery, you see it, it starts to move up to the north a bit, and you're like, oh, well, we're going to finally start to get a move on away. And then in the last few frames, it actually moves southwards back towards Grand Bahama again.
One comparison we could make, to a degree, is Hurricane Betsy for the stalling. The thing is, with Betsy, the stalling happened to the northeast of the Bahamas, away from the islands, but that, could have been totally different. It could have stalled over the islands instead. It stalled about 100 miles to the northeast of these two islands. It stalled there for about a day and a half, and then it went towards the southwest. This was early September 1965. And then it slowed down again as it passed through the Bahamas. Not as slow as this storm. Took a day and a half to cross through towards the Florida Keys, where it ended up making landfall as a Category 3, and then went and became a Category 4 again towards the New Orleans area. No Betsy, but that is one of very few comparisons of storms that stalled near or over the Bahamas. A lot of storms do have weaker steering currents in this vicinity, especially just off the islands to the east out in the Atlantic. One big example that was used early on in this storm's life was Hurricane Jean in 2004. That one did a massive loop to the east of the Bahamas by about 200 miles. Under different circumstances, that one might have tracked further northwest, could have done a whole loop around the islands themselves. There's so many possibilities when we first come into these situations. Another one as well. Wait, where are we? Well, we've got the obvious, Joaquin, which started well towards the northeast, struck the southernmost Bahamas, and how long did that one take to turn round? That one was just over 2 days it took to turn round and sweep round the islands, hovering between Category 3 and 4 intensity.
Nathan, I have further questions off Facebook, and to our viewers on Facebook, I've actually zoomed in on the satellite imagery of the eye, and the question, Nathan, relates what can we have a look at the wind field for the areas within the cone and Lakeland, Florida?
We will do shortly. I can tell you that the tropical storm force wind field extends very close to the coast of Florida, about 5 miles offshore. The hurricane force wind field, at the moment, believe it or not, Freeport is only on the very edge of hurricane force winds right now. Fingers crossed, shortly they'll lose hurricane force winds. They'll still be under strong tropical storm conditions, which extend across the whole of Grand Bahama right now, along with those hurricane force winds near the central part of the island. We will show that graphic shortly. Just want to bring up one more comparison. A hurricane in 1929, which sort of did a bit of a track like this up until it neared the islands. It was further north and then it sunk further south, very close to Nassau, moved southwest across the islands. It took 2.5 days to cross from the northeastern islands to the other side of Andros, and then it moved through the Florida Keys. That one was fairly slow moving, but again, nowhere near as slow as this one.
Nathan, just looking at the satellite imagery, it's just going around. Well, we know how the circle, it's just spinning around. It's just not going anywhere. There's a bit of a west-southwest jolt.
Yeah, definitely.
Then it jolts back up, northeast, but it's just...
And the latest eye temperature reading of 14 degrees now again, so it's going round in circles.
Well, yes, but as I just said, it's not going anywhere, and but it's very impressive. To Jared on Facebook, Florida, there's no need to board up your house because, as Nathan said...
Wait, where? Florida? Well, along the coast there could be hurricane conditions, so...
What do you reckon, Nathan? Apparently Jared's saying that a lot of people in his area have...
Depends which area. Anywhere in the hurricane warning area, you know.
Lakeland, Florida.
Yeah, Lakeland. Yeah, no need to board up there. Really, there could still be tropical storm conditions. So obviously, you'll have to make sure that everything is secured, and that is a possibility. It's still not a certainty that tropical storm conditions will happen in the Lakeland area, but if the storm does deviate further west, then you could be preparing for tropical storm winds and rainfall, which could exceed 2 to 3 inches by that point. That is if the storm deviates west. At the minute, though, it's not looking so likely, but this storm is keeping us guessing all the time. I think at the end of this hour we'll break off for a little while because there really isn't much changing with this storm, and I think we'll do what we did again last night and come back on for another hour of discussion at 10 p.m. Eastern. We'll of course leave all of this satellite imagery up on the screen as we continue to watch the storm just as much as everyone else is. It's been crazy so far. So we'll take some more questions for now. Let's see. Can't a hurricane losing intensity over land regain strength over sea? And at the speed this thing is going, can it regain intensity? Well, not whilst it's stalling.
No. And, we're going to get some more data right before the hour ends and that recon pass as well. And I'll be sure to, once the drop zone comes in as well, get that information as well, just because the pressure readings have been quite erratic so far with the drop zone data compared to flight level.
So basically everything is erratic right now.
Everything's erratic. Yeah, it looks like, it's stalled. It's starting to move north. Could it actually pull away? Now it's doing a southwest jog with the eye actually starting to come back over land partially in parts of Grand Bahama. The vol and not just the eye temperature as well, extremely volatile. It looks like in the latest frames in the 1 minute chart that warmer area is getting bigger again. The sheer volatility that we're seeing occur at such a constant rate is absurd.
Certainly in our experience,
it's keeping us so much. It's keeping us extremely on our toes. We're having to monitor this to the best of our ability, and kind of it's kind of like a tennis player when you're on the defensive, and every hit you have to completely change your footing and which way you're trying to go, really, just because the volatility and how we're seeing the storm adapt and change is so rapid and
All right.
unusual, per se.
I'm not sure if you guys on our team can see the imagery that we're putting out on the live stream right now, but this is rather interesting, I think. You're seeing the trend over the last few hours, and I don't know if you want to comment on this, but it appears the eye proper continuing to shrink and shrivel up in latest frames despite that convection blowing up. Can you see this?
Yes, and I mentioned it last hour too that I thought the eye was starting to shrink. It looks like this is kind of confirming it. Maybe the crack in the western eye wall is starting to solidify and become more of a problem out, and that western eye wall might be, the outer eye wall on the western side might be closing and starting to choke it off. Very interesting to see, though. I mean, to be fair, it is a similar size as it was yesterday. It's just it got a lot bigger earlier today, and it's just potentially coming back down. But regardless of that, still notable a change to the downside for the size of the eye in the past several hours. It looks like it could be almost up to like 50% as well.
I think we're
a pretty
also
noticeable shrinkage.
I think we're also joined by Devon now. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Good evening. Can you make any sense of what Dorian is doing right now?
Is hanging on for its dear life. That is something that I can say. It has moved absolutely nowhere in the past hour, from what I can see. Maybe even moving a little bit south, which is crazy. But yeah, this storm is not in a hurry to go anywhere. The eye is, I mean, the structure seems to have gotten better in the past hour, but at the same time, it's just also becoming ragged. So it's gaining structure in some areas, it's losing structure in other areas. The convection's obviously still here and has actually gained momentum since earlier. Recon data is absolutely all over the place, mainly due to the issue of Grand Bahama being right there. So in the western eye wall, also not exactly being in the greatest shape. So those factors kind of make this storm extremely difficult to judge right now, as it continues to slowly, and I think that's really the operative word here, slowly lose intensity due to upwelling of cooler waters. One thing I can say is that the expansiveness of the CDO to the western side has significantly shrunk since earlier today. So I'm guessing that's probably one good thing to go off of.
The National Hurricane Center have put out their 7 p.m. update. They've upped the pressure. It was at 9:40 before, right? It's 9:41 now, so essentially
145, 941.
Yeah.
Is this thing moving southwest?
They're still saying it's stationary right now.
I'm just wondering, because it kind of looks like on the satellite here that it's actually moving south and west.
Well, it looks
right
like
now.
And
Very
the
slow.
recon,
a southwest jog.
And the recon drop zones. Yeah, the recon drop zones do indicate a southwest jog at a very slow pace. AF309 did another pass. It got flight level pressure 2 millibars lower at the lowest point that's visible than NOAA 2 did just less than 20 minutes ago, but numerous points are cut out as well, as the AF309 flights had multiple pressure failures.
The recon data is not going to be complete due to the planes having to fly over Grand Bahama Island, and the recon equipment does not work when you're flying over land.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Nathan, a question for you. Just looking at the satellite imagery, how often does it refresh or update?
Well, this particular imagery, I just wanted to bring a closer look at the storm. So this one is one of the localized sectors, not the rapid scan. 5-minute imagery on this, and it shows you a more long-term trend as well of what's been happening with the storm. So the imagery begins at 3 p.m. my time. So that would be 10 a.m. this morning Eastern time, and it brings us right up to 46 minutes past, so that's 8 minutes ago. So the whole period there, how long's that? A good 6 hours at least.
What I'm gauging from our stream on Facebook, there is considerable interest in the satellite imagery.
Absolutely. This is probably one of the easiest imagery to discern the direction of the storm's eye. You can clearly see what happened earlier. It was a gradual northward movement for a good 4 or 5 hours. Then it swiveled off towards the northeast, and just recently it's just rounded towards the southwest. And quite possibly, as we watch later frames, maybe this could be a very tight that would be an anticyclonic loop, I think. Anti-clockwise loop.
I mean, it is a pretty sharp shift to the southwest from its initial potential northeastern.
I'll
there,
go ahead
especially
and
since-
put something. I'll actually go ahead and put something up on screen share right now. You'll actually be able to really clearly see the loop on.
All right. So we'll see
Nathan.
that shortly as we go back to the other infrared imagery, but I think that was a pretty good view. Awaiting Devon's imagery there, David.
What, looking at the current satellite imagery on the screen, can you enlighten me with the colours? What do they represent?
Well, the one we were just looking at there was the cloud tops, but we'll get back to that shortly. Here's Devon's imagery
All
as
right.
well. Might be a little bit
You can
glitched
really
on this end, but go ahead.
Yeah, I know that the frame rate's probably awful. I am trying to do a high quality screen share here, so in order to get a good high quality screen share, that probably means that the frame rate is truly terrible. Let me try to go to lower quality.
I think we can still tell that it has done that, or it is in the process possibly of doing a loop there.
Yeah, you see on this imagery, it's kind of staying in place for the most part, and then it almost feels like, just because you get the longer term look, that it isn't really just a full northward movement as much as just it's doing a full circle as well, if that makes any sense.
It might be.
Is that
Well,
better?
that's my impression. Is just doing a circle within
it could be
itself.
doing a tricoldal wobble over the same area. It's pretty much the same area it's been over the last 24 hours, roughly, I want to say.
An eye temperature still 15 degrees.
Yeah. Has it gone up
Is
again?
the animation any smoother?
What's that?
Is the animation that I'm showing any smoother?
It's about the same as it was before, but we can still tell that the movement of that storm there.
It's smoother on
Yeah.
my end of
It's
things.
moved. Yeah, you see it just slowly moved off to the north and east. And for the first 3 or 4 hours there, and then it's just sharply wobbled back to the southwest in the last hour.
And then even after that, just watching that again, there it goes, and throwing it back down. Looks like due south in those very latest frames, and possibly about to make it back to southeast. Good lord, if it kept going that direction, it would be right back over Grand Bahama again before long.
Well,
And
parts of the
that's-
inner eyewall already are, actually. To be frank, it looks like the eye is actually already trying to peek over and land there again at this point in time, which is pretty remarkable.
It's just terrible.
What's the NHC saying? The diameter, the size of the eye?
I haven't checked
Prob-
recently.
Probably the same as yesterday at this point. I would assume probably about 10 miles or so is what I would presume, but it could be different. That's what they were saying yesterday. And despite the pretty significant increase in the eye size this morning, it's decreased by about the same amount from what I can see since then. And, we're also just seeing those huge oscillations in temperature as well. The latest frames have the warmer part of the eye taking over the top third of it again, rather than just a very tiny swivel of it that we were seeing earlier.
Mm.
And Nathan, the dark blue in the circle in the eye. What information on that?
Are you talking about the circle on the edge of the
the-
eye, or are you talking about one of the islands there? There is a small island on the right-hand
No,
side.
the dark purple within the eye.
Well, that's just the progression
Dark
of the
purple?
increasing cloud tops around the edge of the eye.
And the green?
I don't actually know what temperatures they correspond to on this imagery, only that red is minus 60 degrees Celsius and black is minus 70.
What I can tell you is the imagery that I'm showing on my screen. You have a blue is minus 50, green is minus 60, red is minus 70.
And just an update, the 7 PM advisory from the agency is out.
Yeah, we did that 10 minutes ago, but if you want to reiterate.
It's out? I didn't know it was out already. 26.9 degrees north, 78.4 west, stationary still, despite the ink back to the southwest. It looks like they're going with the general trend. Keeping 145 miles an hour, pressure of 941 millibars.
Damn. Well, what do we do next? Do we stay on the air here or not? I think we'll stay on here.
Well, I mean, what else? What else do you think there is to discuss? The storm isn't moving.
Well, we need to ascertain.
It's moving a little bit.
We need to ascertain here whether it's doing a full loop or whether it is just drifting south now.
It looks like, taking a look at the imagery, it does look like that it's literally doing a full loop. It wouldn't surprise me if in the next 6 or 7 minutes or so we see this storm moving due east.
It does look like that's potentially already happening. At least it looks like it's more stationary about to do that on the 1 minute imagery that I'm seeing.
Might be slightly southeast in that latest frame that we're looking at. Good lord. Well, to add another twist to the tale, it's now it looks like it's going to do a complete loop.
Yeah, and I think a part of that might be I'm looking at radar imagery here, and I'm seeing a lot of evidence for concentric eye walls at the moment. And I think what might be happening is that inner eye wall is beginning to wobble while the outer one really isn't changing position. So I think that might be what we're seeing right now.
Could you zoom in on that?
Can you show that?
Yeah, I got it on my screen share.
Are you able to zoom in on this? Great.
Oh.
It's not quite as much of a time span. It's only about an hour. How long would you want it to be? How long has this loop been for? Because I can up the time
That's good
span.
enough.
Yeah.
That's good enough. You can pretty well see the two circles in there. You can see a well-defined outer circle and a well-defined inner circle. Although it's not with yellows wrapping all the way around, you can at least see the two circles there.
Yeah, this is from Miami, so this is a little far.
Right, you're not gonna get perfect. I imagine any radar that's in the Bahamas is down.
Yeah, I can't get any radar data from the Bahamas.
The one on the northern part of the island went down last night yesterday, and the ones to the south of that are all working. It's just the one to the north went down. So you're able to see it still, but it's cut off to the northwest.
Okay, a reminder of the warnings that are currently in effect right now. A storm surge warning for Lantana to Alta Maha Sound. A storm surge watch for north of Deerfield Beach to south of Lantana and Altamar Sound to South Santee River. A hurricane warning for Grand Bahama and the Abacos Islands and Jupiter Inlet to Ponte Vedra Beach. A hurricane watch for north of Deerfield Beach to Jupiter Inlet and north of Ponte Vedra Beach to South Santee River. A tropical storm warning for north of Deerfield Beach to Jupiter Inlet and a tropical storm watch for north of Golden Beach to Deerfield Beach and Lake Okeechobee at this time. Well, 145 miles an hour, a pressure of 941 millibars, moving, well, not moving, looping perhaps, and goodness knows what happens next.
Welcome to No Steering Currents, everyone.
We always tend to be live when we've got no idea what the storm's doing.
Well, it's part of the reason why we're live. We're trying to figure it out.
This is just incredible. I mean, we've got a 145 mile an hour hurricane. How close is this to West Palm Beach right now? It can't be more than 100 miles.
Ooh.
Can't be much more than 100 miles. 150 maybe?
At our
Here, let
update
me
at
figure
3
that.
p.m., it was 102 miles at 3 p.m.
102 miles. So yeah, this storm is
And right
literally
now,
just 100 miles
103
off the coast
now.
of Florida right
103 at
Oh,
present.
yeah.
and
Mile.
we're sitting here, this storm 100 miles off the coast, and we don't even know if this thing's going to push into Florida or not.
True.
Think about that for a second. This storm is sitting 100 miles off a coast which has well over 15 million people living on it, and we don't even know if the storm is going to have hurricane force winds come ashore.
Do you think we can rule out a Florida landfall yet or not?
No, we can't.
Not on the northern side. I think on the southern side of things, you can almost do it, but I don't think on the northern side you.
I mean, if the steering currents break down for longer than expected, someone asked last night, what if the trough doesn't pull it off? Then what ends up happening? And no, we're gonna have to wait till tomorrow, obviously, to figure out if this thing's actually going to start moving anywhere. Right now, it's just an absolutely terrible situation for the Bahamas. That's the only thing I can really guarantee right now.
Definitely southeast in the latest frames there.
Definitely southeast. Wow.
Nathan, I'd like to ask Devon a question.
Go ahead.
What, following on to what you just provided, Devon, what would it need, and I'm thinking about the steering mechanisms, what would it need to push it or pull it towards Florida?
What would end up needing to happen? Because there's nothing to push it towards Florida. That's the thing. Is that there really isn't a mechanism to push it towards Florida anymore. The thing is that if this trough doesn't pull it off, for one, it's going to stay directly over here for over the Bahamas for even longer than expected, which is somehow an even more frightening scenario. And then for two, it's going to eventually, move slowly off to the west, because it was moving west to begin with, just very, 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 very slowly. And then either another ridge could all of a sudden build up and push it west, or another trough would pick it up and build it east. But, that's more than 5 days out. So we're really depending on these computers telling us that this trough is going to come down and pick up this storm in the next 24 hours.
And
The
where's
trough
the
is
location of the trough?
pretty close. Trough is pretty close. It can actually be seen on a satellite if you zoom up far enough to around where you can see nearly the whole state of Florida. You can start to see it. It's near and over Georgia. You can see kind of the barrier between where the air is moist and is producing storms and where it's not. And that's where that trough is really. So we can see the trough is positioned fairly close. And if it's going to pick this storm up, it's got to start doing it soon because it's like right there.
And the temperature inside the eye is now 13 degrees again, so we don't know where it's going, we don't know whether it's strengthening, and we don't know what's going to happen next here.
Yeah,
We are
it's now pretty
sorry we
soon.
can't be more
Recon
helpful.
is inconclusive. We don't have ground-based measurements. It's just a continuously terrifying situation that continues to unfold. I'm sure there's at least, like I said, 15 million people that would really like to know the answers to the questions that we're asking. We wish that we were able to provide them for you, honestly. But at this time, it is just
Not going
this is just
anywhere.
it's just a very complex situation going on right now with the storm, and it's really, really, really tough to tell to see if this storm is just going to go anywhere anytime soon.
Devon,
It's terrifying.
Devon, considering your knowledge, experience, is there another comparison that we could refer to when we look at Dorian?
No. No. I can't even think of a worldwide comparison where any storm has sat over an island at or above Category 4 intensity for more than 24 hours. I can't even think of one. If you guys can think of one, please let me know. But I cannot think of a single storm that has stalled over an island or over any piece of land for 24 hours and has maintained at least Category 4 intensity, which this storm has a pretty good chance of doing. I think it's only got 6 more hours to go.
Yeah, I'm looking at the European run right now just to see what the Euro says, since it's the best, at least mid-range track forecast model that we have. It says at 8 o'clock Eastern time tomorrow, the storm is still very close to Grand Bahama, just barely to the west of the island, the center. So it still says that by 8 o'clock Eastern tomorrow, the eastern eye wall will be battering Grand Bahama still.
I'm sorry, you said that the center of the storm is to the west of Grand Bahama.
That is what the European is saying will occur by tomorrow morning.
That is absolutely not good news at all for Florida. That would bring hurricane force winds ashore.
Yeah, the European does say that is definitely a plus.
Yeah, that is not good at all. I'm taking a look at the latest satellite here, Nathan. I think the storm looks like it's moving due east now.
Let's see. Looking through this imagery again, this is something that we're all collectively staring at. Not yet on this one, but it might be just a few minutes behind. It wouldn't surprise me. Still seeing southeast there. What I can
I'm at
tell you,
2306.
what I can tell you is that satellite estimates for rainfall over these islands so far are well above 12 inches. We don't actually have a number right now because it's off this particular scale that I'm looking at, but estimated rainfall there in the last 24 hours well above 11 inches, and 6 hourly totals in the eye wall right now roughly 7 or 8 inches. So if you extrapolate that number, 8 inches per 6 hours, worst case scenario over some of these islands, and it's been over them for about 36 hours in some cases. That's quite a lot of rain if it's anywhere near the total that would be posted with that. I can't even work it out right now.
That's just insane. Yeah, I wouldn't even want to work that out. I mean,
48 inches.
You're saying 8 inches in 6 hours.
In the last 6 hours, yes.
So 8 inches in the last 6 hours.
According to
There's
satellites.
There's 6 hour periods in 36 hours. That's 48 inches.
Potentially.
Yes.
That's what the satellites are getting.
Which is pretty unfathomable, to say the least. Of course, I'm not sure if that would end up breaking a Bahamas rainfall record. It is still well shy of any Atlantic hurricane rainfall record. I believe it's 100-some inches by Flora.
Oh yeah, over 100 inches by Flora, but there was also a storm a very long time ago. I can't remember it now, that delivered a huge amount of rain a long time ago. Can't remember it now. People supporting us in the YouTube chat right now, we're so thankful that you're sticking with us, really, because a lot of this, we are experienced with what we do. We don't always know exactly what's going on, but we can tell you the very latest and the basic information about what we're seeing in front of us, even if we can't explain it. And we're doing our very best with that at the moment, and we're staying level-headed as always with the chances of what's going to happen where. We very, very rarely say for certain whether something's going to happen or not unless it's absolutely clear-cut. So for instance, the Florida coast still might not get hurricane force winds, but it is, well, if it jogs to the west, then it will become more likely. Tropical storm force winds are upon the east coast of Florida very soon, 103 miles from West Palm Beach right now, and tropical storm force winds are apparently around 5 or 10 miles off the coast.
And the
Nathan.
storm, and that's the thing about this storm, is that it only takes a few miles of a jog to either the east or west that will determine just the long range forecasting. Because one of the things about weather is that it's an extremely chaotic system. So you end up changing the starting conditions by just a mile. Say this storm, the trough picks this up a mile to the west of forecast or a mile to the east of forecast, it could have huge consequences going forward. So we're trying to figure out what this thing is doing down to the mile, because it is extremely important to know where this storm is once it starts moving north.
Yeah, the other hurricane I was thinking of was the extremely wet storm that happened in November 1909, a hurricane that struck Jamaica, delivered 135 inches of rain.
Yikes.
That is believed to be the highest in the Atlantic. We're not talking about matching that record yet with this storm, but the amount of rainfall over these islands must be pretty insane.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
Yep, looks more due east in that latest image there, Devon. So looks like we're going to see a complete loop. You can see it there, and down it goes, and just about turning east at the very end. Don't look at this imagery too closely, because as soon as the imagery stops, I still see a spinning motion every time that imagery stops at the end of the loop by now.
All right, so I've been looking at for a little bit of time now the upper level wind maps, courtesy of College of DuPage and the National Weather Service, to see where exactly this trough is and if that weakness is opened up. And it looks like at least the 500 millibar level, that weakness is open right now for the storm to be moving northward. It looks like at the 300 millibar level, it is not, and at the 700 millibar level, it is open. So it looks like the only place that's not exhibiting as much weakness as would be needed for this to start having a northward trend is the 300 millibar level.
All right, Isaac, you're showing us radar and satellite imagery right now. Anything you'd like to pick out here?
Oh, just a wobble that you guys have been mentioning for the past few minutes here. You could see that slight eastward, northeastward or eastward jog there as it possibly may have done a tricotal wobble, as evidenced by both satellite and radar. A little bit harder to see on radar because it's moving a little bit slower than on the satellite that I have on the right. But just wanted to note that, and I'll leave this up here if you want to look at it later.
Certainly interesting. Thomas, we're still with your radar imagery as well. Any change? Eye structure, eye wall?
It looks like the southern side of the eye wall looks a lot better on radar than it did just about 20 minutes ago. And it looks like things are substantially stronger according to reflectivity on the southern side for both the inner eye wall and the outer eye wall. And it almost looks like there's a point where they come together at this point. So that's definitely interesting to see. Eye wall replacement cycles can be incredibly difficult to predict. I don't know if there is a situation where instead of the inner eye wall being choked off, it more merges, converges with the outer eye wall, and they both become.
Yeah, that's once they start merging, that's when you know that the eye walls are starting to. That's when you know the inner eye wall is starting to get choked off. Is when they start merging. But the fact that it's the southern eye wall that is getting stronger is, well, that's the eye wall that's right over Grand Bahamas, so that's awful. Why does it have to be the southern eye wall?
Latest temperature in the eye now 10 degrees, so I think we're seeing sort of like a leveling off here, generally around 10 degrees.
Yeah, I think that the reason it's the southern eye wall at this point is because shear on the northern side has increased quite a bit at this point.
And will that start to do something to kill off the storm?
Well, that's,
I mean,
I think, most of the reason why it's projected to weaken after it makes its northward motion. Once it starts moving more quickly northward, sea surface temperatures are very warm where it's expected to go. I just think wind shear is going to be what's weakening.
Well, there we are. Latest imagery. IR imagery here showing that the storm appears to be doing a very tight loop right now, and looks like it's done the main accelerated part of the loop and it's just stalling again in those later frames there.
Yeah, this
Incredible.
is,
Any laughter that you hear on this stream is in exasperation, I think.
yeah, this is one of the most astonishing, incredible, unpredictable storms that I've ever tracked in my lifetime.
Just to think about what 6-7 days ago, this thing barely looked any good, and nobody could have said at that time it would have been a Cat 5, and then look where we are now. Yesterday it became a Cat 5, now it's a Cat 4.
We thought this was going to die.
Yeah, just think about that. A few days ago we thought it would be nothing more than maybe weak, maybe moderate tropical storm, and then just yesterday it became a Cat 5, and now it's a 4. That's pretty much stalled over the Greater Bahama Island there.
And only the fourth hurricane to reach stage 10 on the CDPS in the Atlantic, Devon.
The only one to hit the Bahamas. Unless I misunderstood the question, can you repeat it?
I was just saying the fourth hurricane that you've measured to reach stage 10 on the CDPS in the Atlantic.
Yep, that is correct at landfall. Preliminarily, it depends on obviously postseason analysis and what the actual rainfall is from the storm. But preliminarily, the landfall on Great Abaco Island was likely the third highest landfall in Atlantic hurricane history by terms of destructive potential since 1988.
We continue to look at that radar on Isaac's screen there as well. Still doesn't look quite as good on that western side on your imagery, or does it come back at the end there? Well, a little bit.
Yeah, it's just, I guess, maintaining or trying to maintain its strength at this point. It's going to be kind of hard to do that since it's been in the same area for about the last 24 hours. So, remains to be seen when it exactly does the turn. When it does the turn north, will be a crucial point of the storm's life, and we will probably get a better look at where it's going to go in the long run.
In these latest frames on radar, I'm noticing that the inner and outer eye wall are definitely merging at this point. So we can say the inner eye wall is
That'll
getting choked
explain
off,
the
and
oscillation.
an eye wall replacement cycle is occurring right.
Water vapor imagery showing again that loop there that's occurred. Would you say it's as a result of the eye wall replacement cycle?
As a direct result, yes.
So there we have it, mystery solved. And that pretty much means that we're back where we were before, only the eye wall replacement cycle is occurring and the storm is still stalling, and it's just, well...
Yep. So the really frustrating thing is that now this inner eye wall is going to get choked off, and now what's going to happen when this outer eye wall starts contracting? Is this storm going to seriously gain intensity again once this starts happening? I'm really worried to see how this storm comes out of during this eye wall replacement cycle. Really, really worried to see what ends up happening here.
Just how much energy is there underneath this storm? It's been perched in that general area for the best part of a day now. Sooner or later, it's
Clearly there's enough of it. Clearly there's enough of it.
Yeah.
And it's going to use it until it's dry.
And the big question is when does it become dry?
I don't know. I'm looking at latest sea surface temperature estimates, at least using the Reynolds. I'm not 100% sure when these, but it's still saying 29 to 30 degrees Celsius under there. I mean, you can obviously see, at least on where I'm getting this from, a little bit of the path of Dorian. So this is obviously relatively up to date. And it looks like there's an obvious cooling under it, but still about 29 degrees Celsius is what it looks like.
Yeah, most sea surface temperature products update daily, don't they?
Yeah, and so, I mean, it still looks quite warm from here. I'm not sure how much cooling has occurred, but this is very close to the Gulf Stream.
We've got a very glitched Devon there.
That's it. Sorry, am I coming through now?
That's better.
Okay, yeah. Sometimes my internet's going to cut in and out. I do apologize about that. Anyways, yeah, so those sea surface temperature products do update daily. If this thing's still got 28, 29 degrees sea surface temperatures underneath it, that's insane. I'm just really interested in seeing what this storm looks like once the sidewall replacement cycle is complete, because that could be another big determining factor in where this storm ends up heading.
I'm honestly really scared to see what this does after the inner eye wall choked off in this case.
I'm being really optimistic and hoping that the storm just falls apart. Even though I know it's not going to happen, I'm just being optimistic and hoping that it knocks the storm down another 20 miles an hour.
Latest temperature inside the eye is now 10 degrees, 9 degrees. But from what we've seen on the structure, that probably trumps the eye temperature indications, right?
I would say so. I'm not sure how accurate of a factor eye temperature can be, especially when the inner eye wall is being choked off. I haven't used eye temperature overly often, at least myself, for measurement of intensity. This is relatively new to me, so I don't really know how eye wall replacement cycles normally affect eye temperature. So I can't really say whether or not it can be used accurately here. But since the eye is in a volatile state, at least to me, it seems like that may not be an overly accurate de- depiction of how intense this.
So, are there any news on more recon flights tonight?
I don't think we're going to get any useful recon data until this pulls away from Grand Bahama. Honestly.
Why is that, though?
As the recon, at least the surface measurements, they do not work appropriately in and around land. It does not work in shallow water, and it does not work over land, obviously, because it's a tool specifically made to work over water.
Sure.
Specifically over deep ocean water. So the longer this thing meanders around Grand Bahama, the less that we do know about this. One thing I can say is regarding the eyewall replacement cycle, there is an extremely distinct double peak in the winds with the recon passes. So, like an extremely distinct double peak. So,
and this applies to the ground as well. So people along the coast there will be experiencing 2 eye walls with 2 wind spikes.
It could very well be the case, yes.
Well, this is where we're at right now. 5:30 midnight here where I am. That makes it 7:30 over there on the US East Coast. And we are at a crossroads. In more ways than one. We don't know
we've
whether...
been at a crossroads here for over 24 hours, really.
But this is literally the moment where it decides whether the storm is moving towards the west, towards Florida, to deliver hurricane conditions to the coast, whether it's going to move further north or east and not affect the coast so heavily, or and whether the storm will intensify from here or weaken. And you guys don't think there's an indication this storm is going to weaken anytime soon now?
The only thing that's going to prevent it is going to be the upwelling. I mean, no other conditions, I think, are really getting in to affect the storm.
What we did see earlier today is that wind shear was higher than expected and dry air was higher than expected.
This storm's got such an upper level anticyclone that those metrics are absolutely irrelevant.
All right then. Let's get a latest position estimate. The center of the eye obviously hasn't moved very much at all. I can now tell you that the center of the storm's eye is approximately 12 miles from Great Sail Key to the west. Closest point of Grand Bahama, 14 miles away from the center of the eye. Freeport, 31 miles. Freeport has been within 35 miles of this storm since 9 o'clock this morning. Of the eye.
So, to make sure here, this storm has traveled exactly, let's see here, 0 miles in the past 6 hours.
Let me tell you for sure. Let's see for sure how far it's moved in quite a period of time. Okay, that's not as long as I wanted. That's only a 3-hour period. I'm just trying to get a 6-hour period here. I've got a 5-hour period. Nope, how long is that? I've lost the ability to count even. A 7-hour period, it has moved 5 miles. 5 miles northwest.
5 miles northwest, and this storm is moving southeast. So, or due east. Might as well call it 0.
Well, it has done a loop, but it's not moving very far east right now, I can tell you. Very, very little. It's done that meander round towards the north, northwest, west, southwest, south, southeast, and as it moved towards the east, it has just been sort of like there's a pushing motion towards the west where it's just equalized and it has just stopped again.
Oh.
The movement's quite weird.
Nathan, I have a news item.
Yes.
One news feed that I monitor, breaking 9/11. Disney Cruises has confirmed it's left dozens of staff members on its Bahamian island.
All right.
I forgot about that. They had, I believe Disney. Yeah, Disney does own an island.
Well, what can we say at this point? Let's reiterate some of the watches and warnings. Whilst we do that, we'll flick back over to the latest National Hurricane Center map to show you what's expected over the next few days. Take a break from looking at that imagery. It's sending our eyes in a whirl. The wind field is increasing, just about to reach the coast of Florida, and any further westward movement will probably push it over the coast with tropical storm force winds. A storm surge warning is in effect for Lantana to Altamaha Sound. A storm surge watch for north of Deerfield Beach to south of Lantana and Altamaha Sound to South Santee River. A hurricane warning for Grand Bahama and the Abacos Islands in the northwestern Bahamas. Jupiter Inlet to Ponte Vedra Beach. Hurricane watch north of Deerfield Beach to Jupiter Inlet and north of Ponte Vedra Beach to South Santee River. A tropical storm warning for north of Deerfield Beach to Jupiter Inlet, and a tropical storm watch for north of Golden Beach to Deerfield Beach and Lake Okeechobee. Something I should have read out a long time ago is the anticipated effects, because they have changed a little bit. In terms of wind, devastating hurricane conditions continue on Grand Bahama Island. Do not venture out into the eye, as winds will suddenly increase after the eye passes. Hurricane conditions are expected within the warning area in Florida by Tuesday. Hurricane conditions are possible in the hurricane watch area beginning Wednesday. Tropical storm conditions are expected within the warning area through Tuesday and are possible in the tropical storm watch area by tonight. A life-threatening storm surge will raise water levels by as much as 12 to 18 feet above normal in areas of onshore winds on Grand Bahama Island. Near the coast, the surge will be accompanied by large and destructive waves. Elsewhere in the US, these are what we're expecting if it strikes at high tide. Lantana to South Santee River, 4 to 7 feet above normal. North of Deerfield Beach to Lantana, 2 to 4 feet. Rainfall. Northwestern Bahamas expecting an additional 6 to 12 inches, isolated storm totals of 30 inches. The Central Bahamas an additional 1 to 3 inches, isolated storm totals of 6. Coastal Carolinas 5 to 10 inches expected, isolated 15. The Atlantic coast from the Florida Peninsula through Georgia 4 to 8 inches, isolated 10. This rainfall may cause life-threatening flash floods. And of course, we've also got the threat for surf and swells, large swells off the coast of Florida and the Bahamas, of course, and will spread northward along the southeastern United States throughout the next few days. And the potential for isolated tornadoes through Tuesday along the eastern coast of Florida. The National Hurricane Center will be putting out an intermediate advisory in the next 20 minutes. We'll stay on for that whilst we continue to monitor what on earth is going on with the storm's current movement. Let's see if this imagery has any new additions to the latter frames there. And again, there it is, stalling. It's come to a complete stop once again after doing that loop.
Yeah, it seems.
Yeah, go ahead.
It seems as though that it's indecisive when it comes to where it's going to go. Mainly because the steering flow remains to be so weak, and we're all just waiting when it's going to begin to make that northern movement again.
Let's
now
see
it's just going to wobble around.
Let's see if we've got some questions. Well, this is probably the most elementary we're going to get. What are the possible scenarios after this eye wall replacement? Do you want to explain that again?
Well, hasn't it just completed eye wall replacement cycle?
No.
Oh, well, that's new news.
In the process, though, right?
Yeah. well, once it completes its IWAR replacement cycle, I believe the wind field will begin to expand. And in addition to that, um, the new eye wall will have its strength from the old eye wall being transferred over. So basically, it would either maintain its intensity or weaken just a bit. Beyond that, you have, of course, the upwelling, which will, as long as the storm remains moving this slow, will eventually just keep on biting at its intensity away, weakening it even further. And beyond that, well, we'll just have to wait and see.
Isaac, what are you pointing at right now?
The concentric double eye walls there. You could see on the radar. You could see the outer one there. You could see the inner one there, and you could also see it on satellite. You could see the inner one's a lot weaker than the outer one, which is pushing out more convection by the looks of it there. I was just going on about Orlando's statement there.
Yeah, sure. A question here: is it possible for the storm to move more northwest and possibly make a landfall in Florida instead of northeast? There is still that possibility. I would say the chance of a Florida landfall are now getting rather low from the latest forecasts, unless the storm decides it's going west again. At the moment, putting it about 25% for a landfall, but that doesn't mean hurricane conditions won't happen. Think Matthew. Matthew never made an actual landfall, yet it delivered, I think, 100-mile-an-hour winds to Cape Canaveral.
115 mile an hour.
Something around the 110 mark, I think it was.
It was
Yeah, I
definitely
mean-
triple digits.
Yeah, I mean, regardless of if this makes a direct landfall or not, hurricane warnings are in effect from the National Hurricane Center for the Florida coastline. As a result, people within those hurricane warnings should be preparing to receive hurricane conditions. We can't tell you whether or not those will occur, but if you are in a hurricane warning or albeit actually a hurricane watch, if you're in either one of those, you should be preparing for hurricane conditions right now, because if you're going to receive those, that will occur within the next 24 hours or so, that you'll start to feel those effects.
Just see if we can get some
I
more
will
late-
say, looking at the latest NHC cone, it does look like that really only the very edge of Florida is now within the cone.
Yeah, it is. Which is rather
Yeah.
interesting.
Do they issue a new cone at 8 o'clock?
No, they just account for the current position of the storm. They plot it on without changing the cone, usually. Under special circumstances, they have issued forecast advisories at intermediate windows before, but only if the storm massively strengthens by a good 20-25 miles an hour. They did it during Hurricane Katrina, when it first intensified from Category 2 to Category 4 as it was leaving the coast of Florida. They put out a forecast advisory for intermediate, but it's extremely rare.
Well, they don't need to change the cone at all for 8 p.m. The storm hasn't moved anywhere, and 5 miles in 7 hours. That's nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beyond that, though, it's of course you still, as mentioned before, that even without a direct landfall within Florida, those hurricane-force winds will likely affect Florida still. And then it could also move on to affect the rest of the Southeast, which also needs to remain on watch for.
Question about Orlando and the expected maximum wind gusts there is a question. Well, tropical storm force winds are likely. And I would say gusting probably to the higher reaches of tropical storm status, maybe in the 60s. But that could change as the storm's track becomes more clearer.
Yeah, we're just really waiting for when the storm will begin to make that move towards the north and how close it'll really get to the southeast.
well, we're still watching it there. The National Hurricane Center will update at the top of the hour. Is there any cause to change the intensity of the storm right now?
Well, I haven't been really paying much attention to any reconnaissance or satellite or any sort of notable improvements or degrading of the system at the moment.
Or Recon's been kind of having.
I would say there's no evidence to say it's any different than it once was. I would say that we can't really get proper aircraft readings right now for maximum intensity at the moment. The appearance looks very similar, if not honestly slightly better when it comes to convection, although the eye has gotten noticeably worse in just the past couple of frames. But the eye wall replacement cycle has maybe weakened it slightly.
Yeah,
That's
is
really
going to have everything. That's going to have everything to do with the eye wall replacement that's currently going on. We're going to just have to see what ends up happening over this eye wall replacement cycle. The thing that I'm really concerned about right now is that once this thing ends up getting completed, and we end up seeing that eye start coming back and have those 70-degree cloud tops start coming back once that outer eye wall starts contracting again. That's what I'm really, really concerned about right now.
Nathan,
Yes.
What central pressure are you giving Dorian at this point in time?
Well, the National Hurricane Center know best at the moment. Their recent pressure estimate was 941. They opted a millibar the last hour, I think it was, or maybe the hour before now. And we'll see what they come up with at the next update shortly.
The ATCF file is showing 938.
Oh, well, maybe they will put it down.
Yeah, that'd be could also it could mean it. Yeah, of course, this increases the intensity, but also could do with its size increase, perhaps. But
David,
beyond
that isn't actually up to date. So that was as of 6 p.m. UTC, which is nearly 6 hours ago.
So that's out of date, the whole lot.
Yes. Well, I mean, this one is more important than the other ones. You could probably use that data for the other ones because it doesn't really matter so much. But we're watching every millibar here to see whether it will weaken.
Yeah, but yeah, after eye wall replacement cycle is complete and this thing begins moving again, it's definitely going to be much more important to watch not only how close it gets, but the possibility that it could remain possible for this storm to maybe regain some intensity along the way.
We have updates about the tropical weather outlook for the Atlantic now. They have, first of all, reduced the chances of the third disturbance down to 30% in 5 days from 40. It was 30% in the next 48 hours before and still is, and that's what's depicted on the image. The one near Mexico, 70% in the next 5 days. I can't remember whether that's changed or not. 60% in the next 2 days.
It is not.
Disturbance 1 is 80% in 48 hours, 90% in 5 days. That hasn't changed. And the other disturbance 4, which is not on this screen that we're looking at, but it is behind disturbance 1 over Africa, that's now risen to 50% in the next 5 days, and it doesn't even exist as an entity yet.
Things just overall are ramping up really all over the northern hemisphere.
Pretty much. Last week it wasn't too active, and now this week it's just all hectic in the northern hemisphere.
Yeah, it's a large increase of activity abroad from every base.
The update is out from the National Hurricane Center. They've reduced the speed to 140 miles per hour and a pressure of 942 millibars at this time. Still a mid-range Category 4, extremely powerful Hurricane Dorian remains stationary and continues to pummel Grand Bahama Island. 26.8 north, 78.4 west, 25 miles from Freeport. No changes in the watches and warnings. and I don't think anything else has really changed in that advisory at all, apart from the wind speed and pressure. The next complete advisory is at 11 p.m. Eastern time. So, team, any thoughts on that? Shock? No. Only a small change.
I'm not overly surprised. I'm not sure how much evidence there really is, other than satellite appearance and the fact that an eyewall replacement cycle is taking place. For intensity, typically intensity goes down a bit. The appearance of the storm isn't quite as good. And so I think the fact that an eyewall replacement cycle is occurring and the appearance is just slightly worse, I think that's at least enough for me to say that it's weakened at least slightly. So 140 seems reasonable.
Devon, any thoughts?
No, not really. The storm's, I guess, just continuing its slow weakening trend as upwelling and the aforementioned eyewall replacement cycle continues to affect it. I don't think we're really going to get a good shot at seeing what this storm's future is until this cycle ends up completing in the next 2 or 3 hours or so.
So I guess the real message is check back at 11.
Yeah.
What we will be doing shortly, we will be finishing up our commentary for a while, just for a 2-hour break. We'll be back on again at 10 p.m. till 11 tonight, as we were last night. In the meantime, between that gap from 8 to 10, we will leave this imagery on the screen showing the storm. This imagery updates automatically, so whenever you tune into the stream, it is the most up-to-date imagery that you're looking at. So even when we're not discussing it, you can still see for yourself just what the latest situation is, whilst we go and update the graphics at the sidebar and the bottom bar as well, regularly updated. But really, there's just not too much more to discuss about this right now, is there, till we come back? Because this storm is not moving, the situation is not changing, it is still delivering complete misery to Grand Bahama Island right now.
Yeah, really. There's not much more to say than that.
And a stage
That's
7 on
pretty
the
much
CDPS.
I mean, that's pretty much the message. Grand Bahamas getting slammed right now by Dorian. And for those in Florida, about 100 to 150 miles away, and we unfortunately can't really say what impacts this is going to bring you. So that's really the message. If you're in Florida or anywhere really on the United States East Coast, you should be on guard. If you're in Grand Bahama, I hope you're in your shelter right now. That is if there is signal.
Anybody from Grand Bahama is currently watching this, man.
I was going to say, I don't think that anyone is, but in the event that for some reason, somehow, someone is, just basically stay hunkered down. Stranger things have happened.
Totally crazy. David, anything else you want to bring up before we wrap up here?
No, I've got nothing. And thank you to those on the Facebook stream. The support has been something, and we've got much more ahead.
We do what we do because it's so important that the updates keep coming out, especially in an uncertain situation and with information coming from all sides and all outlets, some more reputable than others. We try and just use our own observations from what we look at on the screen, bring to you the latest official information, and try and make our own minds up on this as well. We can only tell you what we see in front of us with our experience of tracking storms over the course of about 8 years since Force 13 launched in 2011. And this is, again, one of the more completely unpredictable ones that we are watching. And under normal circumstances, you know, if this storm was just stalling out at sea, it might have been a bit of fun to see, oh, what is it doing now? But the fact that it is so close to these land areas smashing Grand Bahama, a real threat to the coast of Florida, still an indeterminable threat even now, 102 miles from West Palm Beach. This is a really serious situation that we will not be leaving you with.
And Nathan, I just want to say this briefly. Considering what Dorian is doing, the uncertainty that it's generating, along with a massive amount of concern, we haven't forgotten about the other tropical activity.
Oh, that is really secondary. There's so much going on elsewhere. I mean, the strongest storm out there elsewhere is Hurricane Juliet. It's staying out to sea in the eastern Pacific, not doing very much at all. So we can leave that out for the time being. There are a lot of systems developing in the western Pacific right now. They do remain fairly weak. I'm sure if necessary we'll ramp up coverage on Tropical Storm Ling Ling as it goes on to affect some of the Japanese islands, and eventually Korea could strike as a typhoon. So, you know, when one system goes away, as this one will eventually, trust us, it will eventually, but the damage might still be done beforehand. There will then be more things to track out there, and this is a worldwide service and we do our very best to deliver it. I think someone wanted to speak just now.
I just wanted to say that this storm in the latest frames looks like it's moving very, very, very slowly to the east-southeast.
Oh.
Bad news there.
Yeah, I agree.
For,
Crawling east-southeast.
Yeah. I did also want to let you know, Nathan, the Joint Typhoon Warning Center is predicting 14W now to be at the day 5 point of Category 2 typhoon.
Wow. Oh my word.
So now both Ling Ling and 14W are expected to be Cat 2s, both by my own forecast and by the JTW.
Unbelievable. So more systems on the way. I can tell you around the world right now there are 10 systems active, and 5 of them are already fully fledged tropical cyclones, depression status or higher. It is 5, isn't it?
That's correct.
Totally nuts. Well, there is the latest imagery of the storm. We will leave that on the screen. We're gonna go away now for a while. We will be back, as we promise, every time, and so far we have delivered on 100% of those promises during the life of Hurricane Dorian. We will be back with more discussion at 10 PM Eastern Time, another update on the storm. Hopefully we can make more sense of what's going on at that point. At the minute, we are just watching and waiting to see what happens after this eyewall replacement cycle, after this loop around the northern tip of Grand Bahama. And hopefully we'll have some better news at some point. Can't guarantee it, I'm afraid. But
yeah,
until,
I mean,
yeah.
I was going to say, like, every step of the way, at least so far for Dorian, I feel like this has been the worst case scenario that it could be. And even worse than initially could be imagined. I don't think that a 185 mile per hour Category 5 was ever on the cards in anyone's forecast until it actually happened. And now it's a mid-range Category 4 stalling over the Bahamas, and it's been doing so as a mid-range Category 4 or higher for the past 24, 36 hours, and quickly approaching 48. So this is just a catastrophic situation. Unfortunately, Dorian is nowhere near done.
Certainly isn't. Those warnings remain in effect along the coast of Florida, rightly so. Hurricane force winds are possible along the coast. We'll be back with you again at 10 o'clock for another update on the East Coast. Stay tuned. This is Force 13 Live, leaving with the imagery now, and we'll be back soon.